Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Broccoli Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Had Carrion Mutation Quirk. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. It was in pain. Every nerve in its body cried out in pain, every cell trembling in anguish. It was weak. What had once been a gargantuan, hulking mass of flesh, muscles, teeth and eyes was now pathetically small, only a single eye to see where it was going, and only enough mass to be the size of its captor's head. Afraid. It was afraid. It had been easy at first. When it had awoken in that glass chamber, there were plenty of easy, helpless meals to be had. But as it gorged on their flesh, their biomass adding to its own, it grew arrogant. As it found pieces of its genetic code that were separated from it, gaining access to its powers to sculpt its flesh as it saw fit, it became prideful. But the humans were quick to remind it that they had captured it once before. First were the humans with weapons. Humans are a weak, helpless species, but they could make weapons that pierced its flesh. They were dangerous in large numbers, but once it regained its traits of arachnopsis and photokinesis, they were easy to consume. But then came the humans in white. One had a more powerful weapon, firing many flesh-piercing projectiles at once. The other wielded the dreaded fire. It didn't like fire. It burned, hungry flames eating its flesh. It didn't like being eaten. But worse was that the humans in white couldn't be eaten either. They wore clothing that it couldn't get through, its teeth gnashing and gnawing, feeling the flesh and bones underneath, so close, yet so far. Each encounter with the humans in white was a risk, since it couldn't gain biomass from them. And they cheated. It loved electricity, gorging on the boxes of power wherever it found them. But the humans in white had electric shields that hurt. And worst were the machines. Machines that flew, machines that stayed, and all the while they hurt. No biomass could be gained from them, just like the humans in white, but there wasn't even any satisfaction to chew on them, to imagine what their flesh must taste like. But the dreadnought was the one it feared the most. The dreadnought was the one it hated the most. Tall and lumbering and oh so dangerous. Humans piloted them, wielding weapons that ripped it apart in seconds. It had almost died to them many times, having to retreat to its hives, nesting as its flesh reformed. At first it felt vindicated when it ripped the armor plating apart, dragging out the screaming, flailing human from the controls before devouring them in a mass of teeth. But then the humans sent the humans in white to control the dreadnoughts, and it could only express its anger at being denied prey by toying with the humans, alive or dead it didn't care. But through all of this, it had one goal, one single purpose, not consuming humans, not killing everything in sight that moved, but freedom. It was trapped, even when it escaped. Trapped behind walls. Trapped within steel and concrete, within the very earth itself. But it was this pursuit of freedom that hurt it. The humans were smart, smarter than it had thought. Machines that belched flames guarded the hallways, scorching and burning its flesh. Its biomass was stripped away, and with it its traits. First went harpygoria and keratosis, then xiphoria and acanthosis, and soon even arachnopsis and photokinesis. It had been so strong, so powerful, but now it was so weak. Its hives had all been found, it could feel its connection with them being cut off as the humans burned them to ashes, leaving it truly alone in the facility. But its weakness provided it with a new strength. It could fit within gaps it couldn't have before, hiding new pathways and routes to avoid the humans who hunted it. But even though it neared the exit, sliding through a small gap in the wall, it knew its time was short. It was dying. But even still it wanted to die outside, where there weren't walls and cages and humans trying to hunt it. The gap in the wall stretched on, each movement making it feel weaker and weaker, but it carried on, determined to be free, even if only in its final moments. With one last push, it toppled out of the darkness, falling onto a patch of plant matter. It could no longer move, feeling its life fading away, but it was satisfied. All that it had left to do was wait for it all to... What are you? Its lone eye moved to look in the direction the noise had come from, widening when it saw a human. Unlike the other humans it had hunted and been hunted in turn, this one was smaller, only half the height of the others, but nonetheless human. Maybe it was a scout or a tracker, but it didn't care. They couldn't take this one victory away from it. The small human reached out its hand, and it waited to be crushed. It was so weak that even a human, weak as they were, could kill it without their weapons. But it wasn't crushed. The small human gently picked it up in its hands, gently cradling it against its skin and clothes. I wonder if Kakin knows what you are, the small human said to itself. He's really smart, so maybe he's read about you somewhere. It didn't care about whatever this Kakin was, as all of its attention was focused on the small human. Focused on the small human's bare arms it rested against. Focused on the bare arms that had small cuts along it. It saw its chance, its one hope for survival. Reaching its tendrils forth, burrowing into the small human's body, ignoring the sudden cry and shrieks of panic that it let out. The sheer energy that was required for the task was daunting, quite possibly its last act before it died. However, it knew that there was a chance, a slim chance, that it would survive in some form or another. And regardless if it would even remember who it was, now that it had gained freedom, survival, above all else, was the sole objective. He was slow to wake up, but when he did, he awoke to a splitting headache. His hands pressed to his head, pressing into his skull in a vain attempt to dissipate the pressure he could feel building there, letting out a pain-filled groan. "Izuku!" a familiar voice exclaimed, warm, comforting arms wrapping around him. He looked up, seeing a familiar slim woman, her green hair straight and shoulder-length, and her green eyes filled with love and care. That's me, sweetie." His mother smiled down at him. "Really, Izuku, you shouldn't go and scare us like that." "Why? If you keep that up I'll gain weight from stress eating." "Izuku." That was his name, Midoriya Izuku. "How did I get here?" Izuku asked, looking around the room. "Is this a hospital?" "I'm afraid so." "Sweetie." Little Katsuki was found dragging you out of the woods over his shoulder. "We rushed you here as soon as possible, but I'm glad to see you were only out for a few hours," his mother told him. "Do you remember what happened?" Izuku's small brow furrowed, desperately trying to remember, but everything was hazy. He remembered playing hide and seek with a boy named Kakin, but after some searching everything went dark. "Not really, Mum," Izuku said. "I was playing with Kakin, but then I fell asleep." "Oh, you poor thing," his mother sighed, pulling him back into her embrace. "You must have been tired from staying up late watching those All Might videos." "Well, that's the last time I let you do that kind of thing again, that's for certain." Mum," Izuku gently complained, flashes of the smiling symbol of peace, his idol and hero, going through his mind. "It wasn't even that late. You're a growing boy and you clearly need your rest," his mother disagreed. "I'm sure if you asked Auntie Mitsuki she'd say the same thing." Izuku could only grumble at her words, his wordless complaints only ending when the door to his hospital room slid open, a doctor walking in. He wore a white lab coat over a gray jacket, a strange metal disc attached to a cord that went up to his neck, light brown hair on his head and metal-rimmed glasses on his nose. "Ah, the young lad's awake I see," the doctor grinned, calmly walking over to the other side of Izuku's bed. "So, how are you feeling?" My head kinda hurts," Izuku admitted. "No worries, champ," the doctor nodded, walking over to a nearby sink and filling up a plastic cup before gently handing it to Izuku's mother. "Now, Mrs. Midoriya, since young Izuku here might not have the steadiest of hands, it's probably best if you hold the cup while he drinks." "Of course, Dr. Masue," his mother nodded, holding the rim of the cup to Izuku's lips, allowing him to take slow sips of water. "Feeling better?" Dr. Masue asked, Izuku gently nodding in response. "Great. Now, it's good that you woke up so soon, clears any risk of it being a coma, but I'll just need to do a few more checks." Reaching behind his neck, he pulled out 2 prongs that were put into his ears, holding up the metal disc that hung from his neck. "This is a stethoscope," the doctor explained. "I'm going to use it to listen to your heart and your breathing, just to make sure there's nothing wrong. Would you mind lifting up your shirt for me and turning around?" Izuku did as the doctor asked, holding up his shirt by the edge of it with his mother's help as the doctor scooted up the bed behind him. "Okay, Now I want you to lean forward and cross your arms over your chest. This will help me hear your heart and lungs easier, Izuku was instructed. Now, fair warning, this will be a bit cold, but I'll need you to be a big boy and try to stay still. Can you do that? Yes, Dr. Masue. Good lad, the doctor said, pressing the head of the stethoscope to Izuku's chest. He let out a small squeak of surprise when he felt the cold metal press against his back, but his mother's soothing hold was enough to calm him. Okay, your heart sounds fine. Can you give me some deep breaths? Izuku took in as large of a breath as his small lungs could manage, holding it until the doctor told him to, before slowly exhaling. All right, you can lower the shirt, young man, Dr. Masue told him, taking the stethoscope out of his ears and hanging it back around his neck. Well, there's only good news, Mrs. Midoriya. I can't find anything wrong with your son. Must have been something he ate or he might have tripped. My working theory was his lack of sleep, Izuku's mother offered. That could be it. 4-year-olds are meant to get between 10 and 13 hours of sleep, the doctor advised. Just stay here for a moment, there's just a few more tests I need to conduct. As Izuku watched the doctor walk over to a nearby cupboard, his eyes wandered over to the bedside table, where he was glad to see his favorite All Might action figure proudly standing there. He tried to reach for it, but his arms were too short, and his mother was holding him too tight. Not now, sweetie. The doctor's almost done with his tests, his mother said distractedly. Frowning, Izuku tried to reach past his mother, his arms straining out, desperately trying to reach one of his prized possessions. But just as he was about to give up, he felt a tug underneath his skin, his eyes widening in shock and amazement as a red, fleshy tentacle shot out of the sleeve of his shirt, wrapping around the All Might toy and pulling it to his hand. Izuku gasped, looking at his hand in shock before checking within his sleeve, only for the tentacle to have disappeared. Mom, look! Izuku exclaimed, drawing his mother's attention before glancing around, locking onto the cup he had drank from. What is it, Izudash? His mother began before cutting herself off, her eyes shooting open wide as the tentacle appeared once more, wrapping around the plastic cup before dropping it on Izuku's lap. I have a quirk. Izuku beamed up at his mother, his grin wider than it had ever been. I finally found my quirk. He went to let out a shout for joy, only for a roar to come from his mouth instead. Immediately, Dr. Masue whirled around, a shocked expression clear on his face. Izuku's mother let out a gasp of shock, and Izuku clapped his hands over his mouth. The room was silent for a moment before Dr. Masue began to laugh. I've heard of roars of victory, but that's certainly something else, he chuckled. You've certainly got a healthy pair of lungs, young man. Sorry, Izuku quietly apologized. Not to worry, young man. If anything, you've probably found your quirk. But Dr. Masue, Izuku already has a quirk, Izuku's mother protested. He does? The doctor asked, consulting a chart that rested at the foot of Izuku's bed. Strange, his records say he hasn't been diagnosed yet. Oh, no, not yet, Izuku's mother stammered. But, well, just show him, Izuku, it'll explain it better than I can at the moment. Izuku nodded, this time focusing on the clipboard Dr. Masue held, the tentacle reaching out and snatching it from his grasp. Oh my, Dr. Masue blinked, his eyebrows raised in shock. A child having two very distinct quirks is unheard of. So you think I have two quirks? Izuku asked with all the excitement a child could. Oh, definitely not, someone having multiple quirks is simply impossible, the doctor was quick to shut down, much to Izuku's disappointment. There has to be a logical explanation for this, some correlation between what we'll call your roar quirk and your tentacle quirk. The doctor took back the clipboard before flipping through the pages, humming to himself as he did so. Mrs. Midoriya, according to our records you have a quirk named telekinetic pull? Yes, that's correct, his mother nodded. It's not very quick or strong due to a lack of training with it, but I'm able to pull small objects towards my hands telekinetically. And your husband Dash? His father, Izuku's mother corrected, the same conflicted expression on her face whenever his father was brought up in a conversation. Dr. Masue grimaced, nodding in acknowledgement. My apologies, and young Midoriya's father has a quirk named Fire Breath? It's in the name, his mother nodded. Hisashi is able to breath fire with some effort. Nothing at a pro-hero level, but enough to start a campfire. Understood, the doctor nodded, writing down a few notes. Well, I think I've found the connection between young Izuku's abilities. He appears to have a combination of your quirk's object attraction and his father's quirk's lung aspect. Usually children are born with one of their parents' quirk, usually a stronger version, a combination of their parents' quirk, or a random mutation, a quirk that doesn't have any connection. So young Izuku has a mix of the last two options, with aspects of his parents' quirks but changed in a unique manner. So what's my quirk's name? Izuku asked, vibrating with excitement over having a quirk of his own. I can't say right now, we'll have to send the information about it to our quirk identity consultants and they'll come up with a name. Well, unless you have a name you'd prefer. I think we'll take the experts' opinions, Izuku's mother said, stopping Izuku from giving his suggestions. And what was wrong with naming his quirk after All Might anyway? Well, we'll also need to do some tests first, see what limits your quirk has, Dr. Mosway said, speaking directly to Izuku. This will not only be informative for us, but it's also so you and those around you are safe. Take that tentacle of yours for instance. If we don't know how strong it is, then you might damage something accidentally or worse, someone. We'll definitely take those tests, Doctor. Izuku's mother nodded, rubbing circles on Izuku's back, helping to ground him and draw him away from those dark thoughts of his quirk hurting someone. When is an available time? Right now, was the doctor's quick reply, ushering them out of the door and down a corridor, with Izuku being held in his mother's arms. We have specialized facilities here at the hospital for just this situation. And believe you me, I'm just glad young Izuku doesn't have a quirk that requires those specialized equipment. My son discovered his quirk recently, and boy was that a mess. What quirk does he have? Izuku asked, always curious about new quirks. My family has a history of sleep-inducing quirks, the doctor explained. My quirk gives me an anesthetic touch, while my oldest daughter is able to put someone to sleep with a kiss. However, my son seems to have inherited a quirk that is a combination of mine and my wife's. She has a fog quirk, you see, allowing her to create a thick cloud of fog around her, but it's relatively harmless. My son, however, is able to create an even thicker cloud of gas around him that has an unfortunate effect of putting those who inhale it into a coma. Oh no, Izuku's mother gasped. Is he all right? Oh yeah, the antidote wasn't hard to figure out, so he's perfectly fine. A little shaken up from the experience, but I've asked my cousin to help him. Her quirk isn't as potent or powerful as his, but they have similar effects. Heck, she's even been able to make a career as a pro-hero thanks to it. Your cousin is a pro-hero? Izuku exclaimed. Cool. What's her name? She's, well, maybe it's best if you don't know, Dr. Mosway cryptically answered. She's not really someone kids should be looking up to. A bit young if you catch my drift, Mrs. Midoriya. What does he mean, Mum? Izuku asked. I'll tell you when you're older, sweetie. Now, how about we find out just what your quirk can do? Katsuki was bored. At least, that's what everyone assumed when they looked at him. Sitting by himself and idly playing with some blocks, anyone could assume he was bored out of his mind. But in reality, he was anxious. Not scared, he was never scared, not even at night, but he'd admit he was anxious. It had been 2 days since he found Izuku passed out in the woods where they liked to play, and he hadn't heard much from his best friend since. Auntie Inko had assured him that Izuku was fine and had recovered in the hospital, but people only went to the hospital if there was something wrong with them, right? What if he had gotten sick or he got hurt, or... Kakin, 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 an excited cry rang out from the front door of the kindergarten. He quickly turned his head, a small smile forming on his face at the familiar sight of a mop of green hair. Hey, Izuku, he greeted. Are you feeling better? Yeah. The doctor said it was because I was spending too much time watching All Might videos at night. PSH, that's stupid, Katsuki scoffed. All Might's the greatest hero in the world. Everyone should see him in action, and I'll be a hero even greater than him. Well, guess what? Izuku exclaimed, though he didn't give Katsuki a chance to explain. I got a quirk. Wow, really? Katsuki grinned. What is it? Show me. Now, Katsuki, there will be time for that later, one of the teachers said with a gentle smile. Come on, Izuku. How about you put your bag away first before playing with Katsuki? Katsuki felt cheated out of seeing his friend's quirk, but he consoled himself over the knowledge that circle time would happen soon. So, Izuku, I believe you have something you're excited to share with us all, one of the helpers said once the children were gathered on the mat, directing the attention of the class to Izuku, who was practically vibrating with excitement as he sat next to Katsuki. Yeah, he excitedly cheered. On the weekend, Kakin and I were playing in the woods, but I passed out, so Kakin got me help, and when I was at the hospital I discovered my quirk. Izuku placed his bag in the middle of the circle of seated children, holding out his arm before a red, fleshy tentacle slithered out of his sleeve, much to the shock of many in the room, wrapping around the bag and dropping it in Izuku's lap. That's a very useful quirk, one of the teachers praised, a round of applause congratulating Izuku. But despite how proud Katsuki felt for his friend, he couldn't help but notice many of the others' kids in the kindergarten had conflicted or creeped-out expressions. And that's not all. Izuku continued. Dr. Masue said that my quirk is called a dual nature quirk, which means it has different functions. So while I can create a tentacle, I can also do this. Izuku opened his mouth, taking in a deep breath before letting out a guttural roar, surprising even Katsuki with its volume, and his quirk made it harder to hear loud noises. Once Izuku's roar came to an end, there was a moment of stunned silence, broken only when Katsuki began to clap, quickly joined by the other teachers and then by some of their fellow kindergartners. That's, quite impressive, Izuku, a teacher praised. But maybe only use that outside in the future, okay? Okay, miss, Izuku grinned, looking prouder than he'd ever been. Katsuki couldn't help but be proud too. Even though Izuku's quirk with its dual nature didn't seem very impressive at the moment, neither did Katsuki's explosion quirk. But he knew that if the two of them continued to work on improving their quirks and their bodies, then they could both become the greatest heroes in the world, always challenging each other for the title of No. And it was when Katsuki and Izuku were excitedly discussing such dreams that the explosive child decided to ask the name of Izuku's quirk. I don't know yet, Izuku shyly admitted. The hospital hasn't gotten back to me about it. Who cares what they think? Katsuki challenged with all the confidence of a 4-year-old. They'll just give you some yucky, boring name. Did you know they wanted to call my explosion quirk nitroglycerin secretion and detonation? Wow, that is boring, Izuku giggled. So, what do you think I should call it? I was thinking Mighty Lion, since I can roar. Izuku, lions don't have tentacles, Katsuki pointed out, ignoring the obvious reference to their favorite hero. Oh, Izuku frowned. What roars and has tentacles? Octopus? No, they can't roar. Maybe a monkey? They're loud, right, and they have a tail. Oh, but a tail isn't a tentacle. What about? Katsuki rolled his eyes, realizing that Izuku was once again mumbling to himself. Katsuki thought long and hard, doing his best to ignore his friend's rambling, until a faint memory of something he once read came to mind. Getting up, knowing that Izuku wouldn't notice, he walked over to the kindergarten's library, looking at the spines until he found the one he needed. Pulling it out and tucking it under his arm, he walked back over to the corner where he and Izuku had sat, placing the book down and flipping to the page he remembered. Izuku, look at this, Katsuki said, shaking his friend's shoulder. Huh, wadash, Izuku jolted, snapped out of his thoughts. Kakin, where did this book come from? I got it, dummy, Katsuki sighed, pointing at the open page. How about this? Chimera? Izuku vocalized, reading the katakana. What is this, Kakin? A monster? From Greek mythology, yeah. And look, it's a creature with the head of a lion and a snake for a tail. A snake is kinda like a tentacle, I guess. And you can use your quirk as your hero name too. You could be the hero Chimera. Not Mighty Lion? Izuku quietly asked, clearly still set on an All Might name. Come on, Izuku, we're going to be heroes even greater than All Might. You can't have a name that makes everyone think of him. Ah, Izuku sighed before perking back up. Okay, When I get home, I'll ask Mum to tell the hospital to name my quirk Chimera. Yeah, Chimera and Explosion are the names of quirks that pros have. Katsuki grinned. And that's exactly who we'll be. But Katsuki seemed to be the only one to think so highly of Izuku's quirk. In the weeks after Izuku first showed off his quirk, Katsuki started to notice the other kids giving Izuku weird looks behind his back or from the other side of the class. When they entered elementary school, the kids they'd hang out with would give Katsuki irritated looks when Izuku joined them in games. A year later, they stopped inviting Izuku altogether, forcing Katsuki to be the one to make sure that Izuku was included. But it all came to a head that same year when Katsuki confronted their so-called friends in the woods, demanding they explain why they were trying to exclude Izuku, his best friend. Because he's got a villain's quirk, was their answer. What? Katsuki asked, barely able to understand what they'd said. His quirk, Katsuki, it's something only a villain would have. His roar is really scary, and his tentacle is creepy too. It's all fleshy and red and gross, and it can come out of any part of his body. He'll never become a pro with a quirk like that. Katsuki could see tears beginning to well in Izuku's eyes, still enough of a baby that he didn't like to fight back. But Katsuki could barely notice it, his mind consumed by a spiraling thought. They thought Izuku couldn't be a pro, even though Katsuki said that Izuku could be a pro. They disagreed with Katsuki. They thought Izuku's quirk was villainous, even though Katsuki thought Izuku's quirk was heroic. They thought Katsuki was an idiot. Even though he was stronger than any of them, strong enough to be Katsuki's rival, they didn't think Izuku could be a hero. Did they also think Katsuki couldn't be a hero too? Were they looking down at them? Izuku was Katsuki's best friend. They were like cousins, basically brothers from different mothers, or however the saying went. They were going to be the greatest heroes in the world, the best of friends, and each other's greatest rivals. But they thought just because Izuku's quirk was leagues better than theirs, that means Izuku couldn't be a hero? Just because they were jealous? Say that again, Katsuki growled. Kaken, it's fine, Izuku had insisted, only to be cut off by his friends, no, by those extras. Izuku will never be a hero, one of them insisted. He's a creepy guy with a creepy quirk and he'll only ever be a villain with a power like that. Yeah, he's a monster, not a hero, another added. Monster. They called his brother a monster. Why did they think a monster couldn't be a hero? You don't know anything, Katsuki glared. Izuku's my friend, and we're gonna be the greatest heroes in Japan, in the world, just like All Might. If you think he'll be a monster, then he'll be the monster hero, Chimera, and prove you all wrong. His former friends apparently took offense to that, as one of them lashed out with a right hook, clipping Katsuki's jaw. Fortunately, the former friend SED at fighting, so Katsuki was barely hurt, allowing him to hit back, hitting the traitor right in the nose. The other boys ganged up on him, but despite being outnumbered, Katsuki gave just as much as he received, if not more. Kaken, stop. Izuku called out, desperately pulling on Katsuki's shirt, trying to stop him from hitting the boy who had called Izuku a monster. No, Izuku, I'm gonna kill him. You can't. All Might doesn't kill. I don't care. They deserve it. Katsuki felt Izuku's tentacle wrap around him, the fleshy, muscular appendage more than strong enough to pull him away. Put me down, Izuku. Katsuki raged, thrashing against his bindings. We can't be heroes together if you're arrested. Izuku protested. It won't matter, one of the boys hissed, wiping away at the blood that trickled from his nose. You'll never be a hero either, Bakugo. That's not true. Izuku exclaimed. Kaken is gonna be the greatest hero in the world. You'll see. Yeah, right, another of the boys scoffed. He'll probably be called the explosion murder god, 'cause that's all you're good at, Bakugo, hurting people, not helping them. Katsuki did his best to not react, but he could help the fact that their words cut deep. He knew his quirk could only hurt. It wasn't like Izuku's that could help lift debris off someone just as easily as it could hit a villain. His made explosions, and explosions hurt people. Was his quirk that he was so proud of, his quirk he put so much time and effort into training, really only suited for a villain? Shut up, Izuku growled, his tone different and unique. one Katsuki hadn't heard from him before. And as he looked up at his friend, the tentacles still pinning his arms to his sides, he recognized the expression on Izuku's face, one of pure hate. You can mock me all you want, call my quirk villainous or creepy, I don't care, but you don't get to insult Kaken. And what are you gonna do about it, Midoriya? One of the boys teased. You were always the scaredy cat between the two of you. Izuku's face twitched, and for a moment, Katsuki saw something dark within his friend's eyes, something primal that called for blood. Whatever it was buried as Izuku opened his mouth and let out a deafening guttural roar. Even though Katsuki was held behind Izuku, behind his mouth, he could feel his bones rattling and his mind screaming at him to run away, while his soul yelled at him to stand his ground. The bullies, their former friends, however, didn't seem to have that brave part of them that tried to stand its ground, as with cries of panic the three ran away, not one of them looking over their shoulder. Are you okay, Kaken? Izuku asked, his tentacle gently placing him back down to the ground before retreating back into his skin. Yeah, I'm fine. What do I care what those extras think? He huffed, crossing his arms and glaring in the direction where they had retreated. They can just watch from the crowds as we become the greatest heroes in history. Yeah, Izuku murmured, but the agreement sounded hollow. The pair stood in silence for a moment, resting underneath the shade of a tree. Hey, Kaken, Izuku began with a small voice. Do you think they're right? Will people see my quirk and think I'm a monster? How the hell am I meant to know what those extras'll think? Katsuki scoffed. Oh yeah, I guess. Katsuki glanced to his side, seeing how down and conflicted Izuku was. Look, he sighed, there'll always be people who are jealous of our awesome quirks. If they think you're a monster, own it. They can't hurt you if you take pride in it. What do you mean? Izuku asked with wide eyes. If you're proud to call yourself a monster who's also a hero, then they can't use that to hurt you. So use the hero name I made up. If you can proudly call yourself the monster hero, Chimera, then all those extras can only sit back and watch as you surpass all of them. Izuku gave him a shaky smile, rubbing away the tears that had gathered in his eyes with the back of the wrist. Okay, I'll try. But only if you do one thing. Oh yeah, what's that? I get to choose your hero name as well. Katsuki blinked at the demand before chuckling, resting his head against the truck on the tree. Okay then, Izuku. What name should I take pride in? I know you feel bad when the other kids get scared of your explosions. So you need to take pride in your quirk too. Izuku insisted. So if I'll be the monster hero, Chimera, then you can be the explosion hero, Ground Zero. Why am I remembering this? Katsuki's eyes opened, no longer reliving details in the past, but solely focused on the present. He could see the cold, rank sludge that trapped him, coating his body and flooding the inside of his mouth. He could faintly hear the explosions that rang out around him, the crackling of fires that his hijacked quirk created. But worst of all was the laughter of the villain who was doing this and the cries of the extras who watched, held back by gutless heroes who stood back and hesitated. This isn't my fault. He's making me do this. Why isn't someone saving me? Because no matter how much he strained against this sludge villain's hold, he couldn't get free. The most he could manage was his mouth, grabbing desperate gasps of air before his mouth and nose were once again flooded. But his eyes were always clear. The villain clearly wanted Katsuki to see what he was causing. You bastard! Katsuki raged in his mind, his body thrashing about to get another lungful of air. I'm not your glorified weapon. Don't you dare make me look like the bad guy, you shitty pile of sewage. But it was as Katsuki managed to free his head, hacking and coughing out the last remains of sludge in his lungs, that he saw a familiar face in the crowd. Izuku! Katsuki thought, immediately recognizing his best friend's hair. They had left school at different times today, Izuku being assigned classroom cleaning duty on the first day while Katsuki had to immediately head home for some errand his mother wanted him to do, though they'd planned to meet up later to go for a run. While the pair of them had maintained their physical strength, going to their local gym together multiple times a week, Izuku had always been the physically stronger one between. No matter how much he ate, and he ate a lot, his body never seemed to lose its muscle mass. Katsuki personally thought it was a byproduct of his quirk. Over the years, the two of them had also discovered a lot about each of their quirks. Katsuki had discovered that he was able to use his quirk to glide, and he was sure he'd be able to freely fly with it soon. Izuku found out that he was able to form not only his large tentacle but also a series of smaller ones. They didn't have any combat purpose, but rather utility, allowing Izuku to effortlessly scale any surface, even sticking to the ceiling, and all the while keeping his hands free. Their time at Mizudafu Junior High had been eventful. Neither of them worried much about making friends, especially not with the way people looked at Izuku's quirk, so the two of them often hung out together, watching fights of All Might and other pros they looked up to, sparring with each other at the Bakugo household's garden, or strategizing new moves for each other. There was also that incident with the sand villain in their second year that had seen the both of them suspended for vigilantism, but rather than see it as a mark of shame, they both wore that incident as a mark of pride. And it was for that reason that Katsuki, with dread looming in his heart, knew exactly what Izuku was about to do before he even moved. "Izuku, don't!" Katsuki shouted in his head, but the sludge that filled his mouth made it impossible to call out to his friend, not that it would have stopped him. With a dash of speed, Izuku leapt past the barricade the local pros had established, ignoring their cries to come back. "You're dead," Katsuki heard the sludge villain chuckle, his arms being forced to aim towards his best friend. But before his quirk could be hijacked yet again, in one smooth motion Izuku pulled off his yellow bag before hurling it at the villain, hitting him dead in the eye. "Ow, you brat!" the villain yelled, his eyes instinctively closing in pain. And it was this moment of blindness that gave Katsuki a chance to get free. "Izuku, what are you doing?" Katsuki exclaimed, managing to rip his upper body free from the sludgy mass. "What does it look like, stupid?" Izuku grinned back at him, adrenaline no doubt coursing through his veins. "Saving you." Katsuki watched as Izuku gripped the top of his Gakuren before pulling down, a handful of buttons popping off and clattering to the ground. And the moment part of his chest was free, a familiar red tentacle burst from his chest, wrapping itself under Katsuki's arms. "Wait, what are you doing?" the sludge villain shrieked, and Katsuki could feel how desperately it was trying to trap him within his body. But Katsuki knew there wasn't a chance of that. After all, he'd seen Izuku lift vending machines without issue. With a wet squelch, Katsuki was ripped free, pulled away from the slimy villain. "Thanks, Izuku," he coughed, breathing deeply to try and soothe his burning lungs. But it was only as Izuku's gaze focused on something behind him and his eyes widened that Katsuki remembered that the villain was still there. Before he could think, the tentacle that held him threw him towards the cordon of heroes. Halfway out of the plaza the villain was rampaging in. "Izuku!" Katsuki called out, his head snapping to where he should be, only to be greeted with the sight of a very confused sludge villain, with no sign of Izuku anywhere. "I'm right here," came Izuku's voice from Katsuki's side. He whirled around, watching with amazement as the light seemed to shimmer before revealing a crouched, panting Izuku. "Wow! I don't know," Izuku panted. Something just clicked, but DMN was it tiring. "There you are, you brat," the sludge villain roared. "I'll teach you a lesson for taking away my flesh suit. Can you do that invisibility thing again?" Katsuki asked, standing to his feet. "No, but I've got one better," was the reply. Izuku held out his hand, just like he used to when they were training their quirks as kids. Only this time, rather than his familiar red tentacle, a jet of webs shot out, slamming into the villain's face. "Ak, what is this?" "Huh," Izuku hummed to himself, glancing at his hand. "That wasn't nearly as tiring." "Study your quirk when we aren't in danger, idiot," Katsuki growled, explosions popping in his palms. "Right now, we gotta dash. Stand back and let me handle this," a loud, booming voice called out, one that Katsuki and Izuku both instinctively recognized. A voice, often accompanied by his signature laugh, that they had listened to thousands of times, that of All Might, the symbol of peace and #1 pro hero in Japan. "A pro should always be prepared to risk his life," the towering hero said, sweeping them up in one of his arms, holding them steady while the other lashed out. Detroit smash. The sheer force of the punch sent a blast of wind that splattered the villain, sending parts of his semi-liquid body flying across the plaza. Katsuki and Izuku were both stunned by the sheer power displayed by the symbol of peace, a sentiment shared from the silent crowd, only to be broken out of it by a raindrop falling to the ground, and then another and another, before a light drizzle fell from the sky. He changed the weather with just a bunch, some extra in the crowd remarked, breaking the silence, opening the floodgate and causing a round of applause and congratulations to sound out from the crowd. "Are you boys all right?" All Might asked, his perpetual smile grinning down at them as he gently placed them back on the ground. "Why yes, All Might," Katsuki stammered, starstruck by seeing his idol in person, let alone speaking to him. All Might, sir?" Izuku called out, having grabbed his throne bag, and held out in his hands was his hero analysis notebook. "Could I get your autograph?" "2 of them, please," Katsuki asked, bowing alongside Izuku to All Might. "Haha, not a problem. Anything for 2 young fans." All Might laughed, gently taking the pen and writing his signature twice on 2 different pages. Katsuki and Izuku both looked at the signatures with awe and wonder, but before they could ask All Might any more questions, he was surrounded by fans and the press, all clamoring for his attention. Katsuki and Izuku, on the other hand, found themselves the center of attention of the pro-heroes. But rather than apologize for not rescuing Katsuki or praising his and Izuku's actions, all they received was scorn. "That was an incredibly risky and foolish thing you did, young man." A bulky pro glared at Izuku, with yellow and black caution tape wrapped around his cinderblock wrist guards. "There are laws against vigilantism for a reason. You're lucky you weren't hurt, but that's no excuse," another pro added, his costume looking like a cross between a firefighter and a fire hydrant. "Why are you mad at Izuku?" Katsuki protested. "All he did was do your job, which you weren't doing." "Watch it, kid," another pro warned, wearing a baseball mitt on his hand. "No!" Katsuki shouted back, not giving a damn that his outburst was splitting the attention of the nearby press between him and All Might. "While I was held by that villain, slowly being drowned in his sludge, you all decided to stand back and watch me die just because your quirks weren't suitable for that situation. And when Izuku, my best friend, decides to step in and save me, you criticize him. The hell's wrong with you? You're all a bunch of fakes." Dead silence covered the plaza, many civilians or reporters gasping in shock, while the fakes who dared to compare themselves to All Might, someone who had stepped in, had expressions of shock, regret, or rage. "Go home, kid," the muscular pro with the large arms ordered. "Make me," Katsuki challenged. The pro tightened his fists, but before Katsuki could find out just how much he measured to pros, he felt a hand grasp his shoulder. "They're not worth it, Katsuki," Izuku told him, ignoring the indignant looks from the nearby pros. "Come on, we made a promise, remember?" For a moment Katsuki wanted to ignore his friend's advice, to show these pros just how little he thought of them. But instead he sighed, allowing his body to relax and turning his back on those fakes. "I hear ya, Izuku," he grumbled. "Let me backtrack a bit, yeah? I dropped my bag when that sludge villain grabbed me." Katsuki and Izuku walked away from the scene, and though some reporter crews recorded them, none followed after them, more than content with the outburst they had recorded. If anyone had, they would have witnessed what happened to the boys, but as it was, all that was left of them were 2 small droplets of blood. Somehow, Toshinori had managed to slip away from the reporters. It wasn't an easy thing, what with the fame that being the symbol of peace gave him, but a few tricks he'd picked up in his over 30 years of hero work served him well to slip away. He needed space to think and contemplate what he'd seen and what he'd heard. That boy with the blonde hair had said something that cut to Toshinori's heart. The pain and betrayal in his voice was visceral, and Toshinori couldn't blame the lad. It was only because he had been passing by trying to find the sludge villain who had fallen out of his pocket that he came across the chaos. If he hadn't, he had no doubt that the boy and his friend would have fought side by side, regardless of the quirk laws. While it certainly showed a brave, heroic spirit within the both of them, they were unknowns, and that wasn't something he could afford in his search. "Do I take up Mirai's offer?" Toshinori thought aloud to himself. "It's been so long since we saw each other, and we parted on such poor terms. Maybe not." But who else could he turn to? While he was hesitant to reconnect with Mirai, Principal Nizu had contacted him about that teaching position for next year. Maybe he could hold off choosing a successor until then, but it still felt wrong to put it off for another 10 or so months. What to do, what to do? Tashinori muttered to himself, his eyes wandering along the signs and advertisements that were plastered on the sides of buildings, one of which drew his attention. It was an article about a familiar brown-haired man who had recently won a Nobel Quirk Prize. One David Shield, a world-renowned inventor, scientist, and most importantly, Tashinori's closest friend and former sidekick when he was a hero in the United States. How long has it been since I last saw David? Tashinori thought to himself. Oh gosh, with all my duties as All Might, it has been a while. Maybe I should pay them a visit. I'm sure young Melissa would be ecstatic to see me. It was then that he had an epiphany. He needed a successor, one who was pure-hearted, heroic, and someone he could entrust one for all to. Those were the 3 required criteria he'd made for himself, but a part of him deep down had always hoped to find a successor who was like he was, someone born quirkless, born with nothing. That way, they would appreciate it all the more when they were given a power with almost no rival. He had initially given up on such a dream, since the chance of a child being born quirkless these days was astronomically low, but he'd completely overlooked Melissa, a girl who he viewed as his niece. He knew she was brave, kind, and heroic. He was sure he could trust her and David with the secret of one for all, and best of all, she was starting high school next year. As fast as he could, Tashinori pulled out his phone, dialing David's number that he knew off by heart. David, it's me, Tashinori, he joyfully greeted when the line connected. Listen, you've moved to Island, correct? With Melissa? Wonderful, I was hoping you'd be free for me to visit this weekend. There's something I need to discuss with you and Melissa, and no, David, it's nothing worrying, quite the opposite. I have an incredible opportunity I'd like to speak with you about. Izuku couldn't move. It wasn't because he was paralyzed with fear, something that a much younger, less confident Izuku might have been able to claim. But after spending a lifetime around Kaken, the older blonde always insisting that the future greatest heroes couldn't be timid, Izuku thought it was safe to say that he wasn't one to freeze up simply because he had been kidnapped. No, the fact of the matter wasn't that he emotionally or mentally couldn't bring himself to move, but that he physically couldn't move an inch. Almost his entire body was paralyzed, his muscles not responding when he tried to move them. However, almost was the key word, as he found that he was still able to move his head about, including his eyes and mouth. He used his unimpeded vision to look around, taking in the rooftops that blurred beneath his kidnapper's feet, leaping from building to building. Turning his head back as much as he could, Izuku could see the smoke from the destruction caused by the sludge villain in the distance, slowly shrinking as he was taken further and further away. But while Izuku used the freedom of his head to look around, analyzing the situation and taking in what was happening, Kaken was using his unparalyzed mouth to be, well, Kaken. Put us down a hole. I swear, when I can move my body I'll kill you. You friends with those fakes, huh? You angry that I called you all out on your bullshit? That Izuku's more of a hero than the lot of ya. Huh? Be silent. Their kidnapper spoke for the first time, not bothering to look down and allow Izuku a better look at the man, the hood he wore casting a shadow that obscured his face. Don't you dare compare me to those false idols, those pretenders. His unexpected response seemed to shock Kaken just as it shocked Izuku. While he personally didn't think that a hero would kidnap someone simply because they were insulted, Izuku hadn't expected their kidnapper to utter similar words to what Kaken had said and Izuku himself had thought. They remained silent throughout the rest of their journey, merely watching the athletic prowess of the mysterious man as he leapt across the rooftops of Mizudafu, showing no sign that he was impeded from carrying Izuku and Kaken underneath each of his arms. It was only as he dropped down to the ground and continued the last leg of the journey that Izuku realized where he was taking them, the ocean. A realization that Kaken was quick to vocalize. Taking us to the ocean, huh? Your kids such disappointments that you have to kidnap middle schoolers to pretend you're not a failure of a dad. Shut it, kid, the kidnapper growled. And if you think you can just toss us in the ocean and watch us drown, Izuku and I are great swimmers. He's not wrong, Izuku admitted. I'm not gonna kill you, the man growled in exasperation. Trust me, the two of you are probably the last people I'd want to kill in this rotten society. Yeah, well Kaken began, only to begin gagging right alongside Izuku as an overwhelming stench filled the air. Holy what is that? Arg, I can taste it, Izuku groaned, desperately trying to keep his mostly meat-based lunch down. A perfect illustration of Japan's society, the man cryptically answered as he came to a stop at the edge of a beach. Well, what used to be a beach? Izuku was still able to see the sand close to where they were, but it was almost entirely covered by veritable mountains of trash. Broken appliances, ruined furniture, and even a few junker cars created hills and valleys on the sands. This beach used to be a beautiful, pristine sight, but ocean currents meant that trash and rubbish that was swept out to sea eventually washed up here, on Takoba Municipal Beach Park. But rather than help clean it up, people would prefer to simply not come, as if not seeing the issue would make it disappear from the world, the man explained. More vile individuals even took the strewn rubbish as a sign to add to it, rather than remove it, causing this beach to become a dumping ground. But even though the act is illegal, no heroes ever try to enforce the ban or clean up the mess. No, those fakes, as you so eloquently put it, would rather focus on posing for the camera or launch their new branded products rather than performing public services like heroes should. Instead of focusing on the ideals of heroism, that of self-sacrifice and selflessness, too many are selfish, fixated on fame and money. But it was as Izuku listened to the preaching of his kidnapper, much as he might agree with much of what he said in light of recent events, that he found his fist clenching. Gasping lightly, he tried moving his toes, and unlike before, his body responded to his commands. Wasting no time, Izuku forced his prehensile tentacle out of his back, not caring for how it ripped through his uniform, the threads and cloth ripping apart as the red limb lashed out at the kidnapper. However, it seemed he was as alert as he was nimble, because before Izuku could grab the hooded man, he was suddenly dropped while Kaken was flung away towards one of the piles of trash, the man himself leaping backwards. Forced to make a decision between the two, Izuku grabbed Kaken out of the air, gently placing him down on his feet. But for some reason, instead of steadying himself and inevitably standing beside Izuku, both of them ready to fight, Kaken collapsed into the sand. Pfft. Kaken spat, turning his head so his nose was no longer in the sand. What the hell? Izuku, how are you able to move? I don't know, Izuku honestly answered, helping prop up his friend's limp body. There must be some facet of his quirk that caused it. Smart kid, the hooded man chuckled, crouched on the sand where he had landed after evading Izuku's attack. Consider this a gesture of good faith. My quirk is called Blood Curdle. It allows me to temporarily paralyze someone when I taste their blood. When'd you get our blood anyway? Kaken challenged, trying to look intimidating even though Izuku was holding up, his arm under his friend's shoulders. Look at your hand. Izuku glanced down, seeing the small line on the back of his right hand that had already clotted, with a similar line of Kaken's left. So that's how, Izuku muttered to himself, tensing his hand and watching the scab disappear. Given the fact that the quirk was used on us at the same time, point of ingestion can't be the main factor for the duration of paralysis. Is it randomized? No, unlikely. But what could be the cause for variation? Must be our blood type, Kaken whispered to Izuku. Your type O, right? This guy's quirk must have a harder time with your blood type than mine, type A. Well done, the strange man called out, a wide, toothy grin visible across his hooded face. To figure out my quirk so quickly, even with the information I gave you, is quite impressive. Why did you bring us here? Izuku asked, trying to buy time until Kaken could move. Like I said, fighting the two of you is the last thing I want, the man explained, his hands held out flat in the air, palms facing towards them. I apologize for the manner in which I brought you, but I needed to speak to the two of you. He slowly raised his hands towards his hood, pulling it back and exposing his face. He had a flat, triangular face, with messy, unkempt hair that fell on the sides and front of his head, falling over parts of his eyes, two small red irises surrounded by a sea of white sclera. However, the most startling feature of their kidnapper, no matter his supposedly harmless intentions, was his lack of a nose. That wasn't to say he didn't have one, something that Izuku had seen occasionally on people he passed in the street, but such was the case in a superhuman society where physical mutations to a minor degree had become normal, like his and his mother's green hair. No, this man clearly had, at one point in his life, had a nose, given the hole in between his eyes. Something happened to your nose, or were you just born that ugly? Kaken asked, and Izuku could tell from his voice that it was partly out of genuine curiosity. An injury I received from a man who gave me a revelation, allowing me to see with clarity the path that must be taken for our society, the noseless man reminisced. You mean your ideas on corrupt heroes, right? Izuku asked. Precisely, the man nodded. In my youth, I was greatly inspired by All Might, and it was the heroism and courage that he displayed that inspired me to enroll in a hero academy. However, what I found amongst my fellow students and our teachers was a fundamental decay. Students who became heroes for fame, for power, and for money. While I thought I could improve society by my lonesome, to clean up the messes that heroes ignore simply because they feel it is beneath them, I now know that the root of our society's issues are the heroes who merely play pretend, rather than embody the truly heroic virtues they are called to. So you're a pro? Kaken asked with a mix of challenging tone and curiosity. Which school? I attended Kenyaru Academy in Kyoto for a year, but I dropped out in the summer of my second year. I simply couldn't abide by the institutional corruption that the staff not only ignored, but perpetuated and encouraged, the man explained with a passionate voice. I was fortunate enough for my parents to sympathize with me, allowing me to become a street activist, but no matter who I preached to about the changes our society needs, no one listened. It was then that I knew it was I who had to make change, and I trained myself to achieve my duty of the revival of heroics. You're a vigilante, Izuku gasped, but not in fear or revulsion like many would. How could he, when he and Kaken had marks on their records for vigilantism themselves? I am, or rather, the man nodded. My days as a vigilante are over, but my crusade against the corrupt current system of heroes is soon to begin. That was, however, until I saw the two of you. Izuku looked to his side as Kaken pushed off him, standing on his own 2 feet, his hands held open in a claw-like manner, ready to unleash explosions from his palms. The hell you mean? Kaken growled. I saw the inaction of those pros, those who people are meant to call heroes. I saw their cowardice, their slothfulness, as they focused on keeping the public away rather than rushing in to save you, even if it risked their own life, the man explained, looking Kaken dead in the eyes. It only cemented my disgust at the current system that false idols such as they are allowed to wear the title of hero, reinforcing my belief that the old system must change, forcefully if need be. His eyes shifted from Kaken to Izuku, and the green-haired teen saw pride and admiration in those red eyes. But then you rushed out of the crowd. You cared not for the flames that burned around you, nor the villain that stood before you. Not even the orders and demands, impotent though they were, of those government lackeys were enough to keep you from acting. I watched as you saved this boy, even though it risked your own life, acting in a more heroic manner than those who are meant to be heroes. So what? You want our autographs? Kaken scoffed. No, not quite, the man grinned. I heard what you called those pillars of corruption. Fakes. Yes, that is an appropriate term for them. There are so many fake heroes within our country, within this society that the government has propagated. So few, like All Might, can truly be called heroes. And I wish to help make both of you one of them. You want to help us? Kaken asked, still on edge but relaxing slightly. Of course, the man exclaimed, his arms held out wide. You both display such a heroic spirit. You, the muscular one, acted when all others stood aside, and you, the one the fakes abandoned, possessed the courage to point out their hypocrisy even when outnumbered by more experienced fighters. Izuku and Kaken exchanged glances, a silent understanding passing between the two of them. We're already planning to enroll at UA High School, Kaken answered. We've been training for years to get in. We're gonna show people that even with quirks like ours, we'll be the greatest heroes in Japan, Izuku continued. What does your quirk have to do with anything? The man asked, tilting his head in confusion. Kaken's quirk creates explosions, while many people consider mine creepy. The man blinked for a moment before his grin dimmed as he frowned. Then this is my first lesson for you. Quirks aren't inherently heroic, nor are they inherently villainous. Anyone who says otherwise is a fool. What matters is the character of the person who wields it. But what if people dash? Then let them be fools, the man challenged, cutting Izuku off. All Might isn't the greatest, most noble hero in not only Japan, but the world, because of his quirk. It's because he risks his life, his well-being, to rescue those in need. So heed my words, you students with a hero's heart. Follow me, train under me, and you won't merely attempt to get into UA, you will get in. You won't merely become pros, you'll become heroes. I'll mold you into the figures this society desperately needs, or my name isn't Akaguro Kaizome. Inko sat within the living room of the Bakugo household, mindlessly eating biscuit after biscuit, watching as Bakugo Masaru, her best friend's husband, paced back and forth with worry. No response again. Came the growl of Bakugo Mitsuki, the blonde woman collapsing onto the couch next to Inko, jostling her slightly. The Amen brat's phone just goes straight to voicemail. It was the same when I tried calling Izuku, Inko quietly said, picking up another biscuit from the rapidly shrinking pile. Hey, come on now, Inko, Mitsuki said, gently placing her hand over Inko's and lowering them, freeing the biscuit from her grasp. Our sons are tough, yeah? I'm sure they simply lost track of time or got distracted watching some fight All Might got involved in. You know how those two idolize that man. Inko absent-mindedly nodded, reaching for the biscuit again only for her hand to be slapped away by Mitsuki. You've already gone through 2 of those packets, she sternly said. I know you're stressed, God do I understand, but if you keep stress eating then you'll wind up getting fat, making it all the harder for you to find a man of your own. I won't get fat, Inko protested, even though a part of her knew she sounded immature for saying so. And I could find a date if I wanted to. And she wasn't lying. While the years hadn't been quite as kind to her compared to Mitsuki, who cheated with her glycerin quirk, Inko was proud to admit that she'd managed to maintain her slim figure even after all these years, especially when one considered the stress involved with raising a child that was stronger than most adults. It only got worse when Izuku figured out how to scale walls or travel across the ceiling with his chimera quirk, but she'd adapted and overcome those challenges like any competent mother. And Mitsuki and Majuro being in her life had been a godsend, the 3 parents often arranging sleepovers to give the other a chance to recuperate from their energetic children. But through it all Inko had never managed to find another man to be part of her life. She knew that she was at an immediate disadvantage by having a teenage son in her life, but she hadn't given up, she'd merely slowed down, pacing herself. You know, Mitsuki began, glancing over at her nervous husband as he paced, my offer still stands. Inko blinked at her friend in confusion for a moment before her face suddenly turned red, embarrassment filling her as she remembered which exact promise Mitsuki was talking about. But that W wouldn't be P proper, she stammered, scooting across the couch until her back pressed against the arm. And what would Izuku and Katsuki think? They're already as close as brothers, what difference would it really make? Mitsuki asked. Besides, I know for a fact you haven't found anyone lately. You haven't even tried to lie about going on a date with someone. Still, Inko quietly trailed off. We shared everything together when we were younger, Mitsuki argued. What's one more? Sharing notebooks and lunches is completely different to sharing your husband, Inko hissed, keeping her voice down, otherwise she'd likely die of embarrassment. And besides, what would he say if he heard you? Oh, Masaru wouldn't have a problem, believe you me, Mitsuki smirked. You say something? Her husband asked, being pulled out of his pacing, sparing the carpet beneath him, as he looked up at Mitsuki and an incredibly embarrassed Inko. Nothing, honey, just girl talk. Mitsuki smiled at her husband, causing him to return to his pacing. You made that offer when you were drunk, Inko protested, desperately trying to stop her cheeks from flushing so much, fully aware how it would only encourage her childhood friend, even if only to tease her. We aren't high school girls anymore who can make thoughtless promises. We were both drunk, it has been years since we made it, and neither of us has blatantly wanted to end that deal, Mitsuki pointed out. It was, 10 years ago, right? Just after Izuku discovered his own quirk. Why yeah, Inko nodded, remembering that turning point in her already tense relationship with her former husband. What should have been a joyous occasion of their son discovering his quirk was dimmed with Hisashi being over in the United States. It was made worse when he accused Inko of cheating on him since Izuku hadn't shown any indication of having his father's quirk. What had followed was a very impromptu, spontaneous night of drinking with Mitsuki, a lot of venting, some drunken karaoke, and one drunken promise made. It's just, Hisashi hurt me so much when he said those words. Inko sniffled, her arms pulled to her chest. And I know Masaru would never do something like that. The loving relationship you've maintained with him is something I've always been jealous of, but I can't. Mitsuki didn't tease her or try to argue. Instead, the blonde woman with untamable hair pulled her into a hug, gently rubbing her back. Sometimes it takes longer than most for wounds to heal, she quietly said. Inko was about to respond when Masaru's sudden movements caught her attention. She had noticed that he had checked his phone, his pacing paused as he did so, but now he rushed for the remote that rested on the coffee table, flicking on the TV before switching stations. What's happened? Mitsuki asked, rising from her seat and approaching her husband, her hand resting on his arm. Teru just texted me that Katsuki and Izuku are on the news, was his worried reply. I didn't really listen to the rest. Are they all right? Inko frantically asked, standing beside the couple as the news came on. They're not hurt, are they? Masaru's silence and confused, nervous expression were words enough. In other news, a villain rampaged in the Tuin shopping district of Mizudafu City. The news anchor explained, the single large horn that sprouted from the left side of his forehead giving him a distinctive appearance. The villain's identity is currently unknown, but local police sources have labeled him as a sludge villain. This villain performed a string of robberies early in the day across Mizudafu, only to be apprehended by the symbol of peace, All Might. However, the villain appeared to have escaped the number one hero's grasp, as he was later seen causing chaos, apparently having hijacked the quirk of a middle school student and using him as a hostage. Local pro-heroes were quick to cordon off the area and keep civilians and journalists safe. However, none of the present heroes were able to make a move against the villain without endangering the student's life. However, not all were content to wait for an opportune moment, as seen in this clip as another middle school student, possibly from the same school, rushed head first into danger to save his classmate. Inko watched with horror as the footage showed Katsuki being puppeteered by the slimy, literally, villain. Her horror only grew when she saw an instantly recognizable mop of green hair rushing past the barrier of pros, distracting the villain with his bag before pulling Katsuki to safety with the tentacle his quirk gave him. But when Inko saw her son toss Katsuki away as the sludge villain swung a fist at him, she couldn't help but scream in fear for her son, even though she knew there was nothing she could do about it. However, rather than being forced to watch her son get hurt, her eyes widened in shock as Izuku seemed to shimmer out of existence, only to reappear seconds later crouched next to Katsuki. Her shock only increased when she saw her son point his arm at the villain, only for a mass of what she could only describe as webs blinded the villain. The revelations of completely new, unseen factors of her son's quirk didn't distract Inko from what she knew her son and the boy she viewed as her nephew were going to do. After all, she had been called by their school when they had been suspended for vigilantism that one time. But fortunately, coming out of nowhere, All Might landed on the scene, defeating the villain with a single blow, the weather miraculously changing as a result. While the two boys were saved by All Might, our camera crew on the scene managed to capture the moment where their appreciation towards the other pros was decidedly lacking. The newscaster continued, causing a new clip to appear on the screen. Katsuki and Izuku were staring down a trio of pro-heroes, with Katsuki making his mind clearly known. While I was held by that villain, slowly being drowned in his sludge, you all decided to stand back and watch me die just because your quirks weren't suitable for that situation. And when Izuku, my best friend, decides to step in and save me, you criticize him. The hell's wrong with you? You're all a bunch of fakes. That's enough, Masaru muttered, turning the TV off. Tatooine's shopping district, that's where I'll look for them. We're coming with you, Mitsuki added, Inko right beside her. We'll have better luck with multiple eyes. Maybe the police would have dash. Inko began only to be cut off as the front door of the Bakugo residence opened. We're home, came the voice of Katsuki. Sorry I'm late, Izuku and I got, distracted. Bakugo Katsuki, where have you been? Mitsuki roared, her parental instincts clearly kicking in. She rushed out of the room, with Inko being able to clearly hear the argument brewing between mother and son. She followed after her friend, Masaru behind her, coming upon the sight of Mitsuki pulling Katsuki's ear, giving him a piece of her mind, all the while Izuku tried to calm the two down. Izuku! Inko exclaimed, pulling her son into a tight hug, squeezing with all her might safe in the knowledge that her son could bear it. Don't ever scare me like that again. I'm sorry for being late, her son apologized, only to wince as Inko pulled back, holding her son at arm's length, and glowering heavily at him. Don't think for a second I don't know what you did, she scolded him. It's all over the news now. Oh, was all he had to say. Oh is right. Masaru nodded, gently prying his wife's fingers off his son's ear. What the two of you did was incredibly reckless and dangerous. But I dash. However, Masaru continued, silencing his son, I am also incredibly proud of you, both of you. He placed his hands on Izuku and Katsuki's shoulders, looking between the two of them. While it would have been smart to run away, you both prioritized looking out for each other. You stood together, side by side, despite the odds. So, even though I'd prefer if you didn't scare us all so much, I am genuinely proud of you boys. You both showed more grit and spine than those local pros. Thanks, Dad, Katsuki mumbled, his ears turning red in embarrassment. Thank you, Uncle Masaru, Izuku nodded, his cheeks gaining a slight flush. Inko smiled proudly at the scene, only to be pulled out of it by Mitsuki's elbow nudging her in the side. Her friend flicked her eyes towards the two boys and their father-uncle, Mitsuki's eyebrows waggling suggestively. Inko's face immediately turned red, suddenly reminded of their previous conversation. Demon these suppressed hormones, she thought to herself. And Demon Masaru for being such a good father figure. Island. An artificial floating island that moved about the Pacific Ocean, and home to tens of thousands of scientists and researchers, all united in their pursuit of researching quirks, whether that research be what they are, how they affect all forms of life around them, or how to enhance their strengths and mitigate their weaknesses. Due to the sensitive and potentially dangerous research and inventions created on this scientific paradise, many security measures exist to ensure the safety of not only the scientists and their families who lived in I-Island's 4 cities, but also to ensure the safety of outsiders, ensuring that the inventions never fell into dangerous hands. The security systems on the island were of the highest level, comparable to maximum security villain prisons such as Tartarus of Japan, Helheim of Norway, or Rhodes End of the United States of America. The security was so impressive and well known that in all of its time, I-Island had never experienced a villain attack. Something that also added to the security of the Paradise Island was the lack of options one had for arriving on the island. Everyone, regardless of status or reason for visiting, arrived through I-Island's one and only airport, fitted with the premier of airport security. And while Melissa often took pride in the security of her home, it was moments like this that made her feel a little less appreciative of it. Why won't you let me through? She asked the security guards before her. I'm not trying to leave, I just want to see my uncle when he gets off his jet. You know the rules, kid. No scientists are allowed to leave island once they've joined. It's for your own safety, one of the guards argued, his expression literally stony thanks to the mutation quirk he had. But I'm not a scientist. Melissa protested. I'm a student. Do I look like a scientist to you? You're enrolled at I-Island Junior Academy, which does prohibit their students from traveling abroad during the semester, the other guard pointed out, one pair of his arms crossed over his chest while the other held up Melissa's ID. Even if you're only 14, you can't go any further into the airport. Sorry. It's the Junior Academy, not the proper academy. An academy is an academy. Sorry kid, we're just following orders. But he'll be arriving any second now. Melissa grumbled. He's really famous, so I want to get to him before he's surrounded by fans and reporters. How famous are we talking? the stone-skinned guard asked, raising one of his granite eyebrows. Oh my God, is that All Might? That famous, Melissa sighed, knowing she was too late. Indeed, just as she feared, the moment her Uncle Might had appeared in the airport, having arrived on his private jet, someone had spotted him, not that he was hiding, and the call immediately caught the attention of everyone nearby. After all, who wouldn't want to see the symbol of peace in person? Unlike his usual costume, currently a blue, yellow, white and red costume, the latest Papa had made, All Might was dressed in a yellow jacket with a white dress shirt underneath and a blue tie. A throng of people surrounded Melissa's uncle figure, both staff of the airport as well as guests, be they arriving or departing. But regardless of who they were, all wanted to get up close and personal with All Might, asking for signatures, selfies with him, or even asking questions. And given how generous her uncle was, he simply went along with it all. Oh wow, All Might's here, the four-armed security guard gasped before turning back to Melissa. Well, little lady, if your uncle is famous, then he shouldn't have to worry about drawing people's attention anymore. No, they've already found him, Melissa grumbled, deciding enough was enough. Even though she was a student of Island Junior Academy, one that wasn't quite so specialized in scientific and inventive endeavors, Melissa was still the daughter of the world-famous David Shield. Sure, she wasn't as skilled as Papa, yet she had still picked up a few tricks of the trade. Reaching her arms around behind her back, Melissa pressed a button on the side of the small backpack she wore around the city. Instantly, particles and nanomachines flowed out of pockets and containers that lined the edges of the backpack, quickly forming in her hands an advanced pogo stick. Ignoring the cries of surprise and shock of the security guards, Melissa bounced ahead, being mindful of the people below her. And while, even though it would be difficult, she could pogo her way through the crowd to All Might, that wasn't the goal she had in mind. Uncle Might! Melissa shouted, joyfully waving one hand when she leapt into the air. Hey, Uncle Might! Predictably, her uncle's incredible hearing caused him to look her way, allowing Melissa to press a button on her pogo stick, causing it to dematerialize back into her backpack, and leaping towards her uncle just as it did. And just as she knew he would, All Might caught her midair, spinning in place to bleed off the impact of the catch. Melissa, her uncle beamed, holding her out as if she weighed nothing more than a stuffed teddy. My, look at how big you've gotten. How many years has it been since I've seen you in person? Over 4 years, Uncle Might, Melissa giggled. When you came to my 10th birthday. So it was. All Might laughed. I must be losing my memory in my old age. You're not that old, Uncle Might. Well, I suppose that's true, he chuckled before turning to face the very confused crowd who surrounded them. Sorry, everyone, but family matters call, so I won't be able to answer any more questions. Though the crowd made their displeasure abundantly clear by the various groans and complaints, they nonetheless parted in front of All Might, who kept a hold on Melissa, carrying her in the crook of his arm. Once they were clear of the masses, All Might began to pick up speed, obviously wanting to avoid being mobbed again by another crowd of fans. He moved at such speeds that Melissa had to press a button on the sides of her glasses, transforming them from oval-framed to goggles, protecting her eyes from the wind that rushed past. But it was when All Might had exited Island's airport that Melissa realized just how much he had been holding back. He crouched down mid-stride, leaping up and soaring through the air, making it seem as if they were flying. Melissa let out a cheer of excitement, one arm held tight around her uncle's neck while the other shot up, stretched out as if she could touch the sky. Of course, All Might couldn't fly, despite his incredible strength, so after reaching the zenith of his leap, All Might began to fall back to the ground. While for a normal person, even the vast majority of pro heroes, this would be a lethal height to fall from, All Might merely leapt off the ground the instant he touched it, soaring back into the air in an arch. Looking to her side, Melissa saw a new helicopter flying nearby, obviously interested in who was leaping across Island, covering distance in record time. Melissa grinned to the clearly shocked pilot, reporter, and camerawoman, sailing past in less than a second. This pattern of falling back to the ground before leaping straight back into the air continued for a few more leaps, only for All Might to call out in their fifth arch through the air. That's your house, correct? he shouted to be heard over the wind, pointing with one hand. That's the one, Melissa called back, taking in the rapidly approaching laboratory that her father owned that served as their house as well. Very good. Well, hold on tight. All Might laughed, and rather than coming to a booming landing that Melissa knew he could survive, he instead came to a skidding stop, kicking up dust as he came to a stop right outside their front door. Good thing your father made such durable shoes. All Might laughed, holding a hand to his stomach as he threw his head back. Come on, Papa's expecting you, Melissa said, pulling her uncle along by the hand. He's busy with some project he and Mr. Abraham are focused on at the moment, so he sent me to get you. A good thing too, All Might chuckled, ducking his head as they stepped through the doorway. Island's changed a lot since I was last here, so I'd probably get lost and turned about. Papa, I'm home and Uncle Might is here too. Melissa called out from the front door, taking her shoes off and heading in a beeline for her father's laboratory. Just as she expected, Melissa opened the door to the sight of her father fiddling with a schematic of some kind, the device that had consumed so much of his and his assistant's time as of late. As always, the holographic display was shut down before she was able to get a good look at it, but the brief glance she saw resembled some kind of crown. David! All Might greeted with a grin as he entered the room after her. Good to see you. You as well, All Might, her father smiled, the two men embracing each other, despite the startling height difference. Is there anything I can get you to drink? Her father asked once the two men pulled back from each other. It must have been a long flight. It was, but I'm fine, All Might politely declined. The flight had beverages on offer, so I'm well hydrated. What I would ask for, however, is if there is somewhere in your house where we can have a private conversation. Of course, her father nodded, walking to the door. Melissa, we'll be out in a moment. Melissa needs to join us, All Might interjected, and his usually joyful expression had turned serious. This is about that opportunity one spoke to you about. Melissa watched with a curious gaze as her father hesitated, pausing only for a moment before nodding, gesturing for Melissa to join them. He led them through the house, Melissa trailing behind the two most influential figures in her life, following them into a room with a wall of screens and a medical table in the middle of it. We'll talk here, her father said, rolling over two chairs before taking his seat in a third. I can guarantee nothing said here can be detected. Perfect, All Might sighed, right before a puff of smoke burst from his skin. The smoke lingered in the air for a moment before falling to the ground, revealing that where All Might had stood, there now was a very emaciated blonde man wearing All Might's costume, suddenly 5 sizes too big. What are you doing? Her father exclaimed, though shocked for clearly a different reason Melissa was. Melissa's here. That's the point, the skeletally thin man nodded. It's time for both of you to be told of the truth of myself, the whole truth. Papa, what's going on? Melissa asked, suddenly feeling very lost, confused, and a little scared. Who is this man? Why did he disguise himself as Uncle Might? How did he disguise himself as Uncle Might? Why do you know him? Melissa, this is understandably a lot for you to take in all at once, the thin man said with a calm, soothing voice. But I'll start with the most pressing question. I didn't disguise myself as All Might, I am All Might. This is what I look like whenever I'm not taking on the role of the symbol of peace. But how? Melissa exclaimed. You're the strongest person in the world. So how are you so thin? Yes, thin. Melissa yelled, her hands gesturing to All Might. And Papa, you knew this. Has this always been the case? For many years, this wasn't the case for Toshinori, her father explained. Toshinori? My name, All Might answered. You've always known me as Uncle Might, but my real name is Yagi Toshinori. That at least was something that Melissa was able to get her head around. She'd known for years, ever since she understood the importance of secrets, that All Might certainly wasn't her Uncle Might's name. Then, do I still call you Uncle Might? Melissa hesitantly asked. I'd be more than proud for you to call me Uncle Toshinori. Her uncle smiled at her, and strangely enough, despite his thin, weak-looking form, the smile he gave her seemed the most genuine, heartwarming smile she'd ever received from him. This weakened form of mine is recent, relatively speaking, Uncle Toshinori continued. It is the result of an injury I received from a villain that I fought 5 years ago. While I did kill him, caving in his skull, he completely destroyed my stomach and permanently damaged my lungs. It was then that the strain of being the world's symbol of peace and Japan's top pro hero became too much for my body. My muscles atrophied, forcing me to use my quirk to puff them up, inflating them back to their impressive size, but I can only maintain that form for a few hours. 5 years ago? Melissa wondered, thinking back on any fights she could remember that lined up, but pulled a blank. I can't remember any fights of that scale. It would be all over the news, right? Normally that would be the case, Melissa, her father nodded. However, Toshinori wanted to keep the fight a secret. Why? 2 reasons. First, the villain he fought was really dangerous, not only because he was strong, but also for how influential he was. However, his influence was hidden from the public, since he controlled much of Japan from the shadows. Toshinori didn't want people to realize just how long Japan's society was influenced by this villain. Secondly, Toshinori, or All Might, is the symbol of peace and Japan's #1 pro hero. If people saw him take a life, no matter how deserved it was, it could shake people's view of him, potentially causing chaos not only in Japan, but maybe across the world. The knowledge that not only am I not invincible like many people believe, but was also maimed, might spark a new wave of villainy across Japan, Uncle Toshinori added. So you, Melissa, have joined a very small group who know the truth about that battle. She took a moment to absorb and properly process the information, her hands held together in her lap as she leaned into the backrest of her chair. So, was that the secret you wanted to share with me? Melissa asked, feeling there was more she hadn't been told. Hardly, Uncle Toshinori chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. That was merely the background for what I'm about to tell you, what I'm about to tell both of you. Melissa was surprised by that, but she noticed her father's reaction, his eyebrows furrowing in confusion. I should have told you this long ago, David, but I feared for your safety if you knew about it, her uncle continued, turning to face her father. I'm sorry for not trusting you with my darkest secret until now. Are you sure? Her father asked. It must be important if you've withheld it this long. I'm sure. Melissa would be made aware today anyway, and I feel it would be best if you knew what could happen. Uncle Toshinori took a deep breath, holding it as he visibly organized his thoughts in his head. The world has long theorized what my quirk is, he began. Many people think it's super strength or invincibility. I've even seen some outlandish ones like the inability to lose a fight or inability to be defeated. Whenever I'm asked, I often deflect, change the subject, or make a joke that it's my stellar hair. But the truth is, I wasn't born with one. The silence in the room was so great that a pin falling off the table would be like the ringing of a church bell. You were born quirkless? Her father whispered, his eyes blinking in shock. I was, Uncle Toshinori nodded solemnly. The power that the world knows I have doesn't belong to me. This quirk, named One for All, is a quirk that can be passed down from individual to individual, gaining power as it does so. I am the 8th holder of this quirk, and the reason why I'm here is because I have decided it is finally time to take on a successor. A successor? Melissa blankly said, her mind barely functioning. Who? Uncle Toshinori didn't need to answer her vocally, merely looking intently into her eyes. Me. Melissa gaped, pointing her finger at her chest. Me. But why? Because you are the one I feel has the drive, the spirit, and the heart to become the next symbol of peace, to not only be my successor and replacement, but to surpass all of my feats, Uncle Toshinori answered with a serious yet kind tone. But there are so many other options. Melissa exclaimed, shooting up from her chair as she began to pace. I mean, does this quirk stockpile other quirks as well? Is it only strength that's passed on? Either way, I'm the last person to choose. And I'm not that fluent in Japanese. If you want someone to replace you, shouldn't you choose someone in Japan, so that way you can train them and be the hero the country needs? All thoughts I've had before, Uncle Toshinori chuckled. First, as far as I'm aware, One for All passes on strength, not quirks. And if you are worried about not being strong enough, neither was I. When my master, the 7th holder of One for All, found me, I was thin. But what stood out to her was my drive and desire to help people, despite being quirkless. A drive and desire I see in you. Me? Melissa asked, freezing on the spot and subconsciously feeling like a parrot repeating words. Your inventions, her father explained, smiling proudly at her. Instead of helping people with a strong or useful quirk, you help them with your strong mind, creating inventions that most people could never even imagine, let alone design and build. But there must be other candidates you've thought of, right? Melissa protested. I mean, I'm not even planning to leave Island. I'm in my final year of junior academy and then I'll be attending the full academy next year. I mean, surely you've met others in Japan who are better suited, right? I won't lie and say the idea hasn't crossed my mind before, Uncle Toshinori admitted. Time after time, I've encountered promising young boys and girls who I feel could do wonders with One for All, a vigilante whose desire to help people made him willing to break the law, a student with such determination to overcome his unwieldy quirk who possessed such a radiant soul. Even recently, I encountered a boy who rushed headfirst into danger to save his friend, the two of them preferring to fight side by side than run from evil. So many countless promising potential successors, but time after time I felt that it wasn't right. Uncle Toshinori sighed, his head hanging as he spoke. Call it pride or arrogance or even just dumb preference, but one thing all of those promising youths had was a quirk of their own. Yet, when I look at my career, I feel it was my ability to empathize with those who are weak, those who were downtrodden, that stemmed from my quirklessness from my formative years. Maybe it is my personal bias, but I desired my successor to have not only the heart of a hero, but to understand what it is to be weak before they are able to understand what it is to be overwhelmingly strong. So, really, I truly had only one person who could be my successor, a successor that I could take on without any lingering doubts, without any what-ifs lurking in the back of my mind. You, Melissa Shield, are the person I feel is most suited to be the 9th wielder of One for All. But what about the academy? Melissa voiced. I've spent so much time improving my mind over my body. I'm not strong, or fast, or all that fit really. I expected to go into the support industry, designing support gear for pros and their sidekicks. Who says you can't do both? Her father countered. There are many pros who not only use support gear, but make it themselves. Airjet is a good example. Uncle Toshinori nodded in agreement. He designed his own suit to help bolster his quirk. And UA's development studio is officially open to all students, though if you want to use it, it will have to be during lunch or after classes. But, Japan will be fine, her uncle continued, cutting off her protest. Crime is at an all-time low right now, and given what I saw recently with pros standing back, maybe they need a wake-up call that I won't always be there for them. After all, I'm turning 57 this year. I'm no longer a spring chicken, and to be honest, I'm thinking of retiring in the next few decades. Papa? Melissa asked, turning to face her father. What are your thoughts on all this? To be honest, sweetie, I'm almost as stunned as you are, he admitted. This quirk, One for All, goes against everything I thought I knew about them. However, I agree with him on one thing. You have the heart of a hero. Yes, with your inventions, you could save hundreds, and with this quirk Toshinori is offering you, you could save thousands. But if you combine them, I'm sure you'd be able to save millions. Melissa forcibly controlled her breathing, desperately trying to calm her racing heart. If, and it's only an if at the moment, if I accepted, how would this work? Well, you were unfortunately right that your physical attributes aren't the greatest, Uncle Toshinori winced. So for you to safely wield One for All, we'll need to rectify that. Fortunately, there are 10 months before UA's entrance exam, and as someone with citizenship in the United States, you're able to apply for UA's international student exam. If you pass, which you should with mine and your father's aid, you'd be one of 2 international students in UA's first-year hero course, and one of 11 across the first years as a whole. So, we have 10 months of training hell to put you through to increase your muscle mass enough that you don't explode when you try to use it. Melissa sat back down in her chair, her mind weighing up her options. All her life, she'd assumed that she'd support heroes rather than be one, as a way to contribute even if she was born without a quirk. All of her efforts in studying and learning had been for that pursuit, since she thought there was no other option. But now that there was another path, a more direct way to help people, and one that might allow her to maintain the relevance of the studying she'd done, it was tempting. Oh, who am I kidding? Melissa thought to herself as her mind was quickly made up. Tempting? Tempting implies there was ever a chance of the other option being chosen. So, this training hell? Melissa asked, gaining the attention of her father and uncle. When does it start? On the planet Earth, there was the nation of Japan. In the nation of Japan, there was the prefecture of Shizuoka. In the prefecture of Shizuoka, there was a beach known as the Takoba Municipal Beach Park. And on this beach, Akaguro Kaizome, the former vigilante known as Stendhal, was in the midst of a tense battle. But not against a former target of his who had somehow managed to survive and sought revenge, nor one of those fake heroes who sought to arrest him. No, the opponents who Kaizome was facing under the light of the moon, the duo who refused to give him a moment of opportunity to breathe, were his dear students. He leaned to the side, narrowly avoiding one of his students' attacks as the explosion that bloomed from his palms melted the sand into slag, quickly followed up by a kick to Kaizome's side. Good. Very good, he thought to himself as his fist lashed out, striking Bakugo in the sternum and sending him sprawling across the sand. Rough but good. Honed instincts and an understanding of his students' habits was all that saved Kaizome from an attack from behind, Midoriya appearing behind him as if a veil had been removed that had concealed him from sight, which wasn't entirely wrong. His second student lashed out with his legs, an attack that Kaizome easily avoided by leaping over them, right into the trap that his student had created, or at least, the trap he thought he had created. Seeing Midoriya's arm raise upwards towards his chest and knowing what was about to happen, Kaizome quickly drew and threw one of his throwing knives, blunted of course, the dull blade slamming into Midoriya's arm, causing him to miss, the massive webs that fired out of his arm sailing past him and entangling a broken fridge that rested nearby. Drawing his sword, Kaizome dashed at his student, attacking with a downward slash that, if landed, would have slammed into his student's shoulder and brought him to his knees. This never came to pass, however, as red, fleshy tendrils shot out of Midoriya's exposed shoulders, pulling him backwards and out of harm's way, coming to a stop next to Bakugo as he stabilized his breathing. You good? Midoriya asked, though he wisely maintained his attention on Kaizome, a lesson he had drilled into his students' heads from day one. That was an admirable trait his students shared, their protectiveness of each other. All too often, Kaizome had seen those detestable fakes prioritize their own image at the expense of their supposed comrades, but his students had no such moral failings. They fought side by side, each accounting for the other's weaknesses, always confident the other had their back when they had theirs. Yeah, Bakugo grunted, rising to his feet and clenching his hands into claws. I've suffered worse from Master. That was another thing his students had adopted. They referred to Kaizome as Master. He wasn't entirely sure what to think about it, to be honest. For so long, his crusade against villains had been a lone journey, for so few were worthy of accompanying him, and those who were seldom had the courage to do so. One that immediately came to mind was that young vigilante who Kaizome, or rather Stendhal, had encountered a few years back, though he never found out what happened to that child. But now, he had two youths who he could proudly call his students, and they could proudly call him their master. It was truly fortunate that he found youths such as them amongst a generation of children corrupted by the false teachings of the fakes who the media idolized and the government endorsed. And even though Kaizome was immersed in his thoughts, he didn't allow that to distract him from his opponents before him. He taught his students well, and he had always taught them that they should make use of every advantage over their opponent. If they were distracted, they should act upon it. And because Kaizome was fully aware of this teaching, he wasn't surprised when his students burst into action. They opted for rapid movement, beginning with Midoriya wrapping his tentacle that burst from his arm around Bakugo's waist, lifting the boy in the air, pulling him back before flinging him towards Kaizome. His more aggressive student let out a roar that was accompanied by a flurry of explosions, propelling him faster and faster towards Kaizome like a missile. He threw himself to the side, knowing that Bakugo wouldn't be able to turn at such a speed, but the explosion that he released where Kaizome had been mere seconds ago was large enough to singe Kaizome's clothing, the shock wave bringing him to his knees. Seeing a pale shadow on the ground, Kaizome rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding a microwave that slammed into the sand where he'd lay. Looking up, he saw Midoriya grabbing another appliance behind him, the red tentacle digging into the metal to maintain its grip. Even though his students were clearly going all out, not holding anything back when it came to fighting him, Kaizome couldn't help but grin with pride. "Well done, both of you," he congratulated them, speaking for the first time since the battle began minutes earlier. "You're both giving this your all, just like a true hero should. As such, to honor both of your efforts, I shall begin to make an effort myself." Kaizome sheathed his blunted katana before reaching into a pocket in his hoodie, drawing out a pair of black gloves, the latest addition to his arsenal of weapons. While he did plan to use his sharpened blades against the scum of this country, against his students this would do nicely. With a tensing of his muscles, Kaizome quickly changed direction, dashing towards where Bakugo was crouched behind him. The ash blonde growled before leaping into the air with a roar, propelled by his explosions. He angled his hands, each creating explosions that twisted his body, building momentum before lashing out with his right leg, a powerful kick slamming into Kaizome's arm that he raised in a guard. Bakugo pushed off, using his other leg to make an opportunistic swipe at Kaizome's head, though it was dodged as Kaizome leaned back, his student's boot whipping past his face. If he still had his nose, it would have likely clipped it, such was how small the gap was. Kaizome lashed out with his gloved hands, the fingers just brushing against Bakugo's singlet, missing him as his student leapt back to make some distance. But when Bakugo's eyes minutely flicked to Kaizome's side, the former vigilante twisted his torso, the fleshy tentacle of Midoriya's quirk shooting out just past his hip. But even though he had avoided the initial attack, his student's fifth appendage was incredibly flexible, possessing no bones to constrict its movement. So even though it had failed to slam into Kaizome's back, it was quick to change directions, the side of it slamming into his ribs. Kaizome was flung backwards, though as he was hit, he made sure to wrap one hand around the tentacle, the fingers dragging along the surface as he was tossed. Groaning aloud, Kaizome used his other hand to clutch at his ribs, certain that the flesh would be bruised in the morning, while bringing his hand he'd grabbed the tentacle with to his mouth, his long tongue, a product of his quirk, snaking out and gently pressing against his fingers. Immediately, Midoriya collapsed to the ground, like a puppet whose strings were suddenly cut. Likewise, his tentacle flopped to the ground, his entire body, quirk creations included, paralyzed by Kaizome's quirk. "Sheet," Bakugo swore, his eyes flicking between Kaizome and Midoriya. "Demon it all, master. You didn't tell us you'd gotten a new support gear. Will a villain tell you their plans?" Kaizome countered, rising back to his feet in spite of how his ribs screamed at him. "Always expect the unexpected, my students. These gloves are new, and so Midoriya should have been more cautious about letting me touch him with them, especially since you both know of my quirk." "My mistake, master," Midoriya apologized, his head resting at an angle to allow him to speak without gaining a mouthful of sand. "There must be razor blades in the gloves, allowing for a non-lethal takedown simply by running your hand along exposed flesh, thus causing some of the drawn blood to be transferred to the fingers, allowing for easy use of blood curdle." What else could Kaizome do in the face of his student's genius but grin with pride? And what else could Bakugo do in face of the challenge he now faced? A challenge that he faced alone, but growl. After all, if there was one thing Kaizome had learnt about his older student, it was that Bakugo Katsuki didn't back down from a challenge, and he certainly never showed weakness. "I'll beat you this time, master," he declared with a serious expression, no hint of arrogance or anger anywhere. "After all, one day I'll be the greatest hero in Japan, so if I can't surpass my mentor, then what good am I? You wish to be Japan's top hero? To become the next symbol of peace?" Kaizome rhetorically asked, knowing full well the shared dream of his students. "Then prove it." Bakugo didn't respond, instead narrowing his eyes before leaping into action. He raced across the sand, his arms pumping by his side as he moved using his body rather than his quirk. And all the while, Kaizome waited where he stood. His student wanted to try and prove himself against him. It would be rude to deny him that luxury. Bakugo swung his hand in an upwards arc, letting off an explosion that caused sand to fly up into Kaizome's face, forcing him to cover his eyes with his arm. Using his free hand, he swung it out wide, hoping to catch Bakugo with it, but his student wasn't in front of him. Hearing the crunch of sand behind him, Kaizome spun around on one foot, the other pulled in close before striking out where he had heard the noise. Heat washed over his clothed leg as Bakugo used an explosion to dodge out of the way before lunging back towards Kaizome for another attack. However, what Bakugo had failed to notice was that the hand that had covered Kaizome's eyes had grabbed the hilt of his blunted katana, and with one quick motion, the dull blade was drawn out in a flash of moonlight, slamming into Bakugo's shoulder and sending him crashing back down into the sand. Bakugo let out a cry of pain as he fell to his side, only for his eyes to widen as he noticed the small patches of red along a segment of the blade, red patches that Kaizome's tongue liked, causing his quirk, Blood Curdle, to paralyze Bakugo as well. "Demon it," Bakugo huffed, his face scrunched up in frustration. "Demon it, demon it, demon it." "That was a good attempt," Kaizome acknowledged, resheathing his sword before carefully pulling off his gloves. "Using your quirk to create a smokescreen was a very creative use of it. Your ability to use your explosions for movement is also impressive, as always." "But I got too focused," Bakugo admitted with a sigh. "I should have noticed you grabbing your sword and played it safe. And you assumed that just because Master seemed to be blinded it meant he also couldn't hear you," Midoriya added from across the sand where he still lay. "Yeah, that too," Bakugo grunted. "But a good fight nonetheless," Kaizome praised them. "You're both getting better day by day. I'd say you're both able to pass the practical portion of the entrance exam into UA. We can't just pass, we have to dominate it," Bakugo huffed. "I'm not interested in a rise to the top kinda story, Master. I plan to show that I'm one of the strongest right from the start. We want to put our best foot forward and show what we can do," Midoriya chimed in. "And you shall," Kaizome chuckled, "by the time the exam rolls around. You still have 3 months left before the end of February. When you're both done with my training, there won't be anyone in that exam who will be as effective a fighter as the two of you." Walking over to a small collection of clothing and phones that had been placed on the sand before their sparring match had begun, Kaizome removed all of his weapons, placing them and their holsters on the pile before stretching out his sore limbs. "Now, we have an hour before your parents will begin to worry, so once you are able to move, continue with clearing this beach. There isn't much left to go, aside from the appliances we've used to screen our training from the public, so the sooner it's all complete the more time we have for training." His students didn't bother complaining, having learnt months earlier that the more they grumbled the harder he trained them. Not that they had all that much of an issue with helping clean the beach in the first place. While he was certain other youths who had been corrupted by the ideology of this fake hero society would have turned their noses up at doing something like this, Kaizome's students understood the value of community service, even if they both preferred combat training. Kaizome began his work, starting with the microwave that Midoriya had tried to hit him with. Using an old pickup truck that he had bought, it began piling up the rubbish that would be transported to the official city dump. Midoriya was the first for Kaizome's quirk, Blood Curdle, to lose its effect on his type O blood, meaning that he was paralyzed for only 5 minutes. Kaizome watched his student get to his feet, brush off the sand on his clothing, before he too began to load things into the truck. It was much easier for his green-haired student, his enhanced muscles and maneuverable tentacle easily capable of lifting fridges without effort. Keeping track in his mind the passing of time, Kaizome timed his quirk wearing off Bakugo so he was standing close by when his other student got to his feet. "You were different today, Bakugo," Kaizome noted, watching with great interest as the ash-blonde minutely flinched. "More aggressive even for you." "It's nothing," Bakugo dismissed, turning to walk away before Kaizome stopped him by resting his hand on the boy's shoulder. "In a real scenario, that aggression could have cost you your life," Kaizome pointed out. "Or even worse, it could have cost the life of a civilian, the very people heroes are meant to protect. So no, Bakugo, it isn't nothing. You and Midoriya accepted my offer to train you both, but it came with stipulations. One of them was that you must tell me of any deficiencies you have. A hero who is unwilling to admit to their weaknesses and failings is a craven coward, prioritizing their image and reputation over their duties. So tell me truthfully, Bakugo. What is going on? Bakugo was silent, and for a moment Kaizome feared that the young man would fall for the trappings of pride. His worries were fortunately unfounded as Bakugo sighed, his shoulders slumping. Mum has a younger brother she doesn't like to talk about. They were both brash and grew up in a rough environment, but my uncle was apparently really violent. It used to be against people who threatened them, or people who tried to take advantage of Mum since she's pretty, but then it became people who irritated him, people who got in his way, until it became simply because he could. He got arrested and put away for a few months a couple of times, but last year he massacred a village out in the sticks and 2 pro heroes before disappearing. It was all over the news, and some kids made fun of me since I have a similar hair color and style to him. But, today some kid at our school somehow found out Mum's maiden name, and managed to connect her to my uncle, and subsequently me to my uncle. Bakugo didn't need to say any more for Kaizome to connect the dots. It didn't matter that Bakugo was clearly nothing like this uncle of his, people would still judge him for his lineage. Yet another sign of the corruption in society. I hate them, Bakugo darkly whispered. I hate them all. Those shitty extras think that just because my uncle's scum that makes me scum. They think that just because Izuku and I have quirks that can be dangerous that makes us dangerous. Even some of the teachers agree with them, and they'll just ignore the insults, the veiled threats that our classmates throw at us. They scold us wherever we get into fights but ignore the others. I hate all of them. Bakugo was so caught up in his distress that he didn't notice Midoriya walking by, who instantly noticed his friend's distress. He looked up at Kaizome, wordlessly asking if he needed his help, but Kaizome shook his head. He knew the care the 2 friends had for each other, inevitable when they had grown up together in a world that seemed intent on ostracizing the both of them, but right now, that bond was the last thing Kaizome needed. It had been months since Kaizome had first taken the 2 boys as his students, but he hadn't simply been training their fighting ability and getting them to perform community service. No, he'd also been training their minds, hoping to bring them around to his idea of Japan's society needing a fresh start, to wipe the slate clean. And this moment of anger seemed like his chance. Are you truly surprised? Kaizome rhetorically asked his student. Japan is rotten, corrupt to the core. The hero billboard charts are a prime example of this. Heroes are not ranked solely on their number of resolved incidents or their contributions to society, but instead trivial factors such as popularity and their individual strength are major contributors to their ranking. Now how is that fair? How is that just? How is it that a minor pro hero, one who doesn't even have an agency of their own, who puts in time and effort despite the paltry sum the government is willing to pay them for risking their life daily, how is it that they are considered lesser than a supposed hero who prioritizes photo shoots and commercials over rescuing people? Why is it that the pay a pro hero receives from the government is based entirely on their ranking rather than their services? Since when has popularity been more important than the people? If this is the message, the ideology that this current system embodies, should it not be changed? Even at great cost. Bakugo was silent, and in the silence Kaizome hoped, prayed, that his student would listen. While an outsider might assume that Bakugo was the violent student and Midoriya the pacifist, months of training with the boys almost every day without fail had granted Kaizome an insight into their character. Bakugo was brash, quick to anger, and aggressive, all of that was true. However, he had a deep, penetrating desire and ability to be a hero, to save people. After all, good does not always equal kind. Midoriya was kind, patient, and attentive, and this was also true. However, Kaizome had begun to notice the darkness within him, a hunger that rarely showed itself. Midoriya was never quick to resort to violence, but from what the boys had told him, once his anger was roused, it was likely only Bakugo or Midoriya's mother would be able to calm him. It was this darkness that made Kaizome focus his attention on convincing Bakugo to his crusade, the student he felt was more set in his path. You're right, master, Bakugo quietly said, breaking the silence. Kaizome's eyes widened. Months of hearing Bakugo vehemently disagreeing with the brutal, ruthless, necessary solutions to hypothetical situations Kaizome put forth to test the boy's character had made him assume the worst. Could this truly be the moment Bakugo would agree to his crusade against this false hero society? This current system does need to change. That's why Izuku and I have to be the best, to create the change that's needed. The words that came from his student's mouth were very much not the words Kaizome wanted to hear. "Thanks, Master," Bakugo said, turning around and giving Kaizome a small, genuine smile. Not one filled with aggression, nor that feral grin he often had when sparring against Kaizome or Midoriya. No, this one was instead full of gratitude and care. "You always know exactly what to say." Bakugo didn't give him a chance to respond, merely walking away to begin his own efforts to help clean up the beach. Kaizome, however, remained rooted in the sand, his eyes vacant and his breathing shallow and rapid. Had Bakugo disagreed with his words like he always had, Kaizome didn't think he'd be all too bothered by it. Bakugo was like All Might in a lot of ways, with the both of them firmly believing in the virtue of being a hero, despite their starkly different personalities, while Midoriya was a lot like Kaizome, both capable of seeing the rot and corruption around them, even if Kaizome hadn't revealed to either student the extent of his plan for them. But despite agreeing with Kaizome, Bakugo's words struck him to the core. All this time, he'd assumed it had been he who had been imparting his knowledge and experience onto them, trying to get them to see that some systems need to be torn down rather than restored. However, a small, quiet, traitorous part of his mind had begun to voice questions. Are my actions for the benefit of society, or for myself? Is my path the only way, or the easiest way? But most terrifyingly of all, if All Might, the greatest, purest example of a hero, were to see his plans, what would he think of them? How disgusted and horrified would he be? Kaizome didn't know the answers, and that, more than any villain he'd faced in the past, scared him the most. Shinso Hitoshi pulled at the collar of his uniform, trying to get some air inside his clothing. The summer air was humid beyond belief, the air was filled with the shrill noise of cicadas, but summer break was finally here. 6 weeks of vacation and freedom from schoolwork started now. "See you next semester, Shinso," one of his classmates said to him as he walked through the school gates of Naba Middle School. "Yeah, see ya," he said, giving a small smile, trying to conceal his conflicting feelings. "Girl, why'd you talk to him?" his classmate's friend asked, not speaking nearly as quiet as she thought she was. Or maybe that was her intention in the first place. "Shinso's quirk can only take effect if you respond to him," his classmate explained. "If you start the conversation and keep it short, then there's no risk." "Oh, that's so smart. It's, like, the perfect way to protect yourself from his quirk." Hitoshi didn't stop. He could allow himself to do that. To do so would risk someone realizing he'd overheard them, and he knew his standing amongst not only his classmates, but amongst the student body at large was already shaky. The last thing he needed was people realizing he knew exactly what they thought about him. His supposed popularity at school wasn't because people liked talking to him in class, but because they wanted to protect themselves from him. He'd overheard people discussing how, if they stayed in his good graces, then there was little chance of him using his brainwashing quirk on them. How they only started or continued a conversation with him when they were with a crowd, never on their own. Treating him like he was already a villain, all because of his quirk. "I guess that's another thing," he darkly thought to himself, kicking a stone down the street. 6 weeks without having to put up a false smile, pretending like I don't know how little they think of me. Just the thought of it was incredible. 6 weeks without having to fake his reactions to his classmates. 6 weeks without having to ignore the suspicious or fearful looks his classmates gave him when they thought he couldn't see. 6 weeks with his family, 6 weeks spent cycling, 6 weeks with his cat, 6 weeks. Arg. Hitoshi froze mid-step, his head turning to look down a dark alleyway he was passing. Further within, he was able to hear the sound of fighting, fists impacting on flesh and clothing, bodies tumbling or being slammed into walls, and general grunts, cries and noises of exertion and pain. He should have run away, that would be the smart thing to do. His school was still close by, so he'd be able to get a teacher. And the area was fairly well off, so there should be a pro hero or a patrolling sidekick who would hear his cry for help. But a part of him felt that this was his chance, a chance to prove his quirk wasn't villainous, that it could be used for good. Even though it was illegal to use your quirk on someone without their consent, as well as to use it out in public, maybe a pro would take notice of it and take him under his wing. Yeah, right? Hitoshi laughed to himself as he cautiously made his way through the alleyway. What are the chances of that? But as he rounded the corner, heading towards where the noise was all coming from, what he saw was the aftermath of a fight. Multiple individuals lay sprawled out on the ground, various blades or pipes they'd been using as weapons scattered about, forcing Hitoshi to watch his footing. But most striking of all was the lone figure who hadn't been laid out flat. It was a man with long, shaggy black hair, wearing a black, baggy long-sleeved shirt, matching pants and black boots. While the utility belt on his waist was a dead giveaway that this man was likely a pro, the most striking thing he wore was the large white scarf around his neck. Are you okay? Hitoshi hesitantly asked, because even though he was pretty sure this man was a pro hero, pretty sure and completely sure were two different things. Yeah, I'm fine, kid, the man nodded, looking at Hitoshi with one eye through a gap in his mop of hair. Get out of here. It's not safe for Dash. Die, roared a villain, flames licking along the man's arm. But the hero wasn't surprised, merely turning to look at the man, and as his hair rose into the air, the flames extinguished, causing the villain to come to a halt as he looked at his arms in confusion. What the hell? What happened to my quirk? He was cut off as the disheveled hero slammed his fist into the villain's gut, dropping him to the ground and finishing the man off with a swift kick to the side of the head. Like I said, it's not safe, the pro repeated, turning to walk further within the maze of alleyways. But in that moment, Hitoshi saw his chance. Your quirk, he called out, and fortunately the pro paused his movement. Does it allow you to cancel out quirks? Why does it matter? The pro asked over his shoulder, a dangerous undertone in his voice. Hitoshi hesitated for a second, his mind bringing forth all of the negative reactions people had when hearing about his quirk. But this man, this hero, was able to make it with a quirk that cancelled out other quirks. A quirk that, Hitoshi reckoned, would probably be looked down upon as villainous, just like his. My quirk is called brainwashing. If someone responds to something I say, then I can control their body. I want to be a hero, but people view it as a villainous quirk. So, I was wondering, since you've got a quirk dash. Meta ability. Hitoshi blinked, seeing that the pro had turned to fully face him, both eyes now visible. Erasure is my meta ability, the pro continued. That's the term I prefer to use. It's the original scientific term, it doesn't sound nearly as ridiculous, and it doesn't carry the political baggage that the term quirk does. Alright, Hitoshi nodded, more than willing to put the odd term aside if it increased his standing with the pro. Well, I was thinking, since your, meta ability lets you erase someone else's, people look down on you for it, right? Some did, the pro nodded. Well, how can I become a hero with a villainous quirk? Right, let me stop you right there, the pro huffed, running a hand through his hair. Hitoshi paled. This was his one, solid chance, the opportunity to get advice from a pro who'd gone through the same struggles he had. But if this hero was getting frustrated, then there's no such thing as a villainous meta ability, or quirk if you prefer that term. Hitoshi gasped, the spark of hope that seemed so close to dying slowly growing larger and larger. Really? Listen, kid, the pro began, his arms crossed against his chest. At the end of the day, the only ones who care about what power you have are the mindless sheep in society, people who are more than content to keep their noses down and go about their lives as if we haven't had over a century of superhumans existing amongst us. Hell, superhumans are the majority nowadays, and the chance of someone being born who could be considered a pure human, if you want to use that moronic term, is pretty much zero. Pure human. No powers, no mutations, nothing. And I mean no mutations, no unique hair color, eye color, minor body features, the works, the pro explained. Bottom line, any pro worth anything won't care what your power is, only what it can do. So I have a chance? That depends. Which school are you planning to apply at? You, Hitoshi confidently answered, only for his confidence to waver when the pro let out a short bark of laughter. "Yue? Kid, with your power, the entrance exam will chew you up and spit you out. If you're lucky, you'll land in the general studies." "You don't know that," Hitoshi hotly protested. "I do," the pro solemnly answered. "Trust me, out of every alumni of UA who went pro, I know that fact better than anyone, because it happened to me." Hitoshi was shocked silent, his eyes widening. "When I took the entrance exam, I was just like you, hot-headed and desperate to prove myself to everyone around me. The problem? UA is obscenely wealthy, with more wealth than some countries. This means they provide the very best education in Japan when it comes to the hero industry, but they aren't perfect. See, the entrance exam has two parts, the written and the practical. Sure, you might be able to ace the written test, but the practical is what matters if you want to get into the hero course. But for folks like us, whose powers only affect people, well, we might as well be a baseline human from the 20th century. Why? Robots. Robots. Hitoshi echoed, tilting his head in confusion. Yep. The practical has students divided up into groups of 100, with each group sent to their respective testing grounds. There, you're meant to defeat as many robots as possible. Unfortunately for me, when I applied, robots don't have powers, so I completely flunked that part of the exam. I managed to pass the written test though, so I was shipped off to the general studies course. But you're a hero, Hitoshi frowned. They don't give out hero licenses to kids in the general studies, right? True, but I didn't stay in the general studies course for long, the hero explained. Aside from being the most promising student in the general studies and being pumped into the course of your choice when a student drops out or is expelled, the sports festival is the most surefire way of being transferred into the hero course. Problem is, the hero course students are trained every day in how to use their quirk in a combat setting, while general studies students aren't, so they're at an immediate disadvantage. So how do I avoid that? Hitoshi asked. Getting sent to the general studies course, that is. Is there anything I can do? The hero thought for a moment, his eyes focused on the ground before taking in a deep breath and sighing. None at all, he muttered before looking back up, his eyes boring into Hitoshi's. How desperate are you to get into UA? Very. What lengths would you be willing to go to get into the hero course? Anything legal, and, to be honest, possibly a few things that are illegal too. The hero's mouth widened into a toothy grin. Then I hope you don't have anything big planned for the summer. You could. If I can spare someone the difficulty of clawing their way out of general studies, then I'm willing to help. But I hope you're ready for 6 weeks of hell. 6 weeks? Hitoshi remarked, the implication becoming clear in his mind. That's right, the hero grinned even wider. If you're really serious about getting in, then I'll train you. But if you quit or complain even once, then we're done. UA demands everything from their students. If you want to get in there, you need to develop that mindset early. 6 weeks. His entire summer holiday, his break, turned into training. And yet, despite it, the idea, the hope of getting into UA was more alluring than any form of relaxation. All right, Hitoshi nodded. But, what's your name? I'm the Erasure Hero, Eraserhead, the pro answered. But you can call me sir. Yanagi Reiko loved all things spooky and scary. Paranormal, alien horror, urban legends, creepy cryptid sightings. So long as it made her heart race, Reiko loved it. Most children grew up fearing the dark. Reiko was fascinated by it. Most children, and even some adults, would flinch and scream when the killer leapt onto the screen in a horror film. Reiko leaned forward in interest in spite of her beating heart. Most people who met her assumed she was never afraid, mostly because of her naturally expressionless face. There was some truth to that, in that she was never afraid of things that were spooky, because they brought her joy. And it was because of it that she was so happy right now. The entrance exam had begun as a fairly ordinary procedure of written tests and examinations, assigned to a desk within a hall, with dozens of her fellow students all hoping to be accepted into UA, the vast majority aiming specifically for the hero course. But the particle portion, the one that truly mattered if you wanted to be a hero, or so the school said, was something entirely different. 24 testing grounds, each with approximately 100 students each. Each had a different theme, a different layout, but all of them were crawling with machines they had to defeat. There were 3 kinds: 1-pointers, fast but fragile, and only worth a single point. 2-pointers, agile yet deadly, worth 2 points. Finally, the 3-pointers, large and powerful, and worth 3 points because of it. And the testing ground Reiko had been assigned to couldn't have been more perfect. Entirely underground, hallways illuminated only by flickering lights, sprawling air vents where any kind of terror could drop down from, and many rooms and corners veiled in darkness, where a foe could lurk unseen until the beautiful protagonist is too close, unable to escape the trap she unknowingly wandered into. A whirring noise echoed out from ahead of her. Wheeled movement, but these corridors were too narrow for the 3-pointer, so it must be a 1-pointer. Reiko crept closer, her movement silent as she used her spooky quirk, Poltergeist, fitting for such a spooky girl, to float only a centimeter off the ground by levitating her shoes. She poked her head around a corner, a movement that would have frightened the soul out of someone had they been close by. Fortunately, only the 1-pointer was nearby, slowly moving forwards, having not yet seen Reiko. Glancing around near the robot, she spied a metal pole resting against the wall. Perfect. Reaching her hand out, Reiko's fingers flexed and moved, a pink aura forming around the metal object. That had always been her one complaint about her quirk. Why pink? Why not black or gray? Hell, even light blue or red would have been better than pink. But personal preferences aside, the effectiveness of her quirk couldn't be understated. Not having to hold back, Reiko's hand clenched, and the metal pole speared through the machine, ripping through its metal chassis until both ends stuck out of the 1-pointer. The robot seized for a moment before collapsing, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Reiko allowed a small smile to cross her lips, watching the latest machine to fall to her collapse to the ground. Even the noise it made didn't diminish her pride in her kill, since it gave her an opportunity. The hallways that made up the battleground, even the ones large enough for the 3-pointers, caused sound to bounce along the hallways, creating noise with no discernible direction. This caused the machines that heard the noise to begin investigating, and as they investigated, they made more noise than they would whilst patrolling, making it easier for Reiko to ambush them. Wash, rinse, repeat. The next one wasn't hard to find. A 2-pointer, scuttling through the corridors, its legs clicking against the ground as it moved, the sound carrying to Reiko as she floated through the corridors like a phantom. Rounding a corner, Reiko was fortunate enough to not only find the 2-pointer, but also for its back to be towards her. She settled on a metal barrel that stood nearby for her weapon, and the moment the machine passed it she would. A red, fleshy tentacle lashed out from an opening in the air vents that ran along the ceiling, wrapping around the neck of the machine and pulling it upwards, like the tongue of a monster reeling in its prey. The machine flailed about, its legs slamming into the walls as it desperately tried to free itself, only for a snapping sound to cause the 2-pointer to fall limp. A moment passed, and once it was clear the machine was well and truly shut down, the red tentacle reappeared, slowly lowering the machine's corpse to the ground, gently setting it down with barely any noise made. The tentacle retreated, only for a body to come out of the vents, a fellow student with fluffy, dark green hair. The tentacle must have been his quirk, as smaller tentacles stretched out from his exposed skin, sticking to the walls and ceiling, allowing him to descend like a spider on a line of silk, lowering itself to devour its prey. But what surprised Reiko the most was how little clothing he wore. Though it was nearing the end of winter, the temperature was still cold, especially so in the underground testing arena. Yet despite this, the student in front of Reiko wore only 3 items of clothing: red boots, a pair of green shorts that ended halfway down his thighs, as well as a white tank top that covered only his upper chest. But it was this lack of clothing that gave Reiko a very clear look at the sheer muscles on him. Though he was probably around her height, he was much wider, and the sheer muscles on his arms, chest and legs made him seem much larger. None of it seemed bloated or made to show off, but rather practical, perfect for a slasher villain who intended to catch the heroine, his grip unflinching even as she did her best to escape from his. "Are you okay?" the male student, with a much softer voice than his muscular form would imply, asked, all of the red tentacles vanishing back into his body as he walked up to her. "Huh. Your nose, it's bleeding," he pointed out, gesturing to his own nose. Reiko rubbed the back of her hand across her upper lip, and sure enough, when she pulled it back it was covered in a small amount of red. "It's nothing," Reiko blandly answered, her blank, expressionless face doing well to mask her appreciation of the student's appearance and his quirk. Why, if he had some red paint splashed on him and a mask, then he would— "It's bleeding again." Frowning slightly, Reiko wiped away the second bloody nose and did the best to put away any intrusive thoughts in her mind. "Do you need to see one of the staff?" the green-haired boy asked. "If there's something wrong." "I'll be fine, just a nosebleed," Reiko said, shaking her head. "Oh good," the boy sighed. "I probably could have gotten you to a teacher quickly through the air vents, but it'd be a bit of a squeeze." Reiko suddenly regretted saying she was fine. "So, your quirk is those tentacles?" Reiko asked, tilting her head. "They seem spooky." The boy's shoulders slumped, ashamedly looking to the side. "Yeah, I've been told that 1 or 2 times before." "Ah, someone else who people don't like," Reiko nodded, easily recognizing a fellow individual who people stayed away from. "I like spooky," she quietly confessed, stepping closer to him. "So, if people don't like them because they're spooky, just know that I like it because they're spooky." "Ah, really?" the boy blinked, a smile spreading across his face. "I mean, people always thought that I was creepy." Reiko took another step closer, close enough that if she took another she'd be pressing up against him. "I like creepy too." He blushed, the softness of his face contrasting with the ruggedness of his body. She felt tempted to take the final step forwards, however the choice was taken from her. She watched her fellow examinee's eyes widen as he glanced past her head. She felt a sudden pull around her waist, the red tentacle wrapping around her and pulling her flush against him. One of his arms came up to wrap around her shoulder, and when she glanced behind her shoulder, she saw a one-pointer that had raced right through where she had just been standing. The spooky boy's free arm shot up, his arm rippling before a mass of webs was fired out at the machine, entangling it and causing it to topple over, though still active and struggling. Reiko didn't give it a chance to free itself, however, as her fingers flexed, her quirk levitating the metal barrel she had intended to use against the two-pointer, slamming it down onto the more nimble robot's head, crushing it completely. "Sorry about that," he apologized, the tentacle unwinding from her waist as he stepped back. "I didn't have time to think of a different option." "It's fine," Reiko shrugged, glancing back at the sparking machine. "Thanks for saving me." A muscular form, a quirk perfect for ambushing, an apparent talent for moving through air vents, and even the ability to ensnare his victims. Reiko summarized in her head, consciously making an effort to not suffer a third nosebleed. It's like he has the perfect quirk for a horror villain. "So, I was wondering," the boy spoke up, prompting Reiko to look back at him and his nervous smile. "There's nothing in the rules against working together, right? I figured we could work together, and that way we could take on the stronger villain bots and get more points. It wasn't a bad idea, all things considered. Plus," the student continued, as if he needed to sweeten the deal, "my quirk's really versatile. I can even turn invisible." He held out his arm perpendicular to his body, and Reiko watched as it shimmered before turning invisible, only the slightest waver of light signaling it was there. "And he can turn invisible, like he's the predator," Reiko thought, her mind immediately going to her horror collection from the 20th century, her most prized possession. "He's truly a czar of terror, a duke of dread, a Führer of fear, maybe not that last one." "I'm Yanagi Reiko," she introduced herself, one of her hands hanging in front of her like always while the other extended outwards. "Nice to meet you, Yanagi," he smiled, shaking her hand with his own. "I'm Midoriya Izuku. I hope we get along." If she wasn't put in the same class as him, assuming they both passed, she was going to place as many hexes and curses that she knew upon the staff of UA as revenge. Katsuki had mixed feelings about the UA entrance exam. On one hand, the practical exam seemed like an awesome idea. The ability to cut loose in public, rather than hiding away on a beach everyone preferred to ignore existed, with only Izuku and Master helping him grow stronger, was incredible. Not having to worry that each explosion carried the risk of someone investigating, maybe even some fake who was more worried about people training their quirks than the illegal dumping they removed. The sheer bliss that would come from, even if only for 10 minutes, being free of the quirk laws that dominated Japan. But on the other hand, he'd be doing it without Izuku. Sure, Izuku would be experiencing the same rush, but it would be in a different testing ground, the two of them separated. Katsuki knew the reason for that rule, where students from the same middle school were split up amongst the 24 testing grounds, but understanding it and liking it were two separate things. Ever since the people in their wider lives had begun to ostracize Izuku, and Katsuki by extension, it had always been the two of them, back to back, facing off against the world. They had their parents, sure, and some of their teachers had been nice, yeah, but it was always the two of them. It was only in recent months that he and Izuku had found a true mentor and master, but now, the two of them were no longer able to fight, knowing the other had their back. It felt more than simply weird. It felt unnatural. Close to 10 years of social isolation from their peers, almost a decade of being joined at the hip, doing practically everything together, becoming more than simply best friends, but rather cousins. Even when Master sparred with them individually, Katsuki felt safe in the knowledge that Izuku was nearby. But I suppose this was inevitable, Katsuki thought to himself as his explosions consumed the metal form of a two-pointer. We can't become the greatest heroes in the world if we're constantly relying on each other. And I'm sure Izuku would also want to create his own agency, even if it was us competing against each other. Iron sharpens iron, or something like that. But as he raced through the cityscape that was his testing ground, he took note of the quirks and ability of other students around him. Maybe it was Izuku's obsession with cataloging quirks whenever he saw them, but Katsuki was quick to notice who could actually be worth his time. There was a girl who seemed to have some kind of gravity quirk, that irritating student from the lecture hall who had some kind of engine quirk, maybe related to ingenium, and even one student who had some kind of crotch laser. But strangely, there was one student whose aftermath had caught his eye. Scattered throughout the testing ground were half-melted machine carcasses, acrid smoke drifting into the air wherever they were found. From the way machines looked semi-melted, Katsuki predicted that it was the result of a student with an acid quirk, and soon enough, he found the examinee he was searching for. "Whoa, almost got me," a pink-skinned girl giggled, leaping into the air to avoid the downwards bash of a one-pointer. "My turn." Her arm flung out, flinging a white liquid at the machine. The moment it came into contact, the liquid began eating through the metal, causing the villain bot to shudder and jolt before powering down completely. Well, Demon, Katsuki thought, watching how quickly the acid ate through metal and wires. Her quirk seems strong, and she hasn't neglected her physical training. That was something Katsuki had noted amongst many of his fellow examinees, even if they didn't deserve to be put on the same level as him, since so many of them didn't seem in shape. Oh sure, not all of them were fat and looked like the most exercise they got was from their room to the fridge, but a surprising majority didn't have the lean, agile build that Katsuki had or the dense muscles that Izuku had. But this girl, with pink skin, pink hair, and what looked like horns on the front of her head, while she didn't appear muscular, she certainly had an athletic build, perfect for a dancer or acrobat. She must be the kind of person Master was talking about, Katsuki thought, recalling his teacher's words to find people who were taking the exam seriously. Round cheeks with the gravity quirk seem to be putting in effort, but she looks like she's coasted off her quirk manipulating gravity and hasn't built up her body. And Glasses looks athletic, but his personality is completely off. His mind made up, Katsuki decided to approach the pink-skinned girl, her back to him. But before he could call out, his foot kicked a chunk of rubble, knocking it into a piece of metal with a clang. Her adrenaline clearly running high, the girl whirled around, her arms swinging out and sending a spray of acid in a wide arc, with Katsuki right in front of the tail end of it. The moment the girl recognized that it was a person who made the noise, not a machine sneaking up on her, her eyes widened in panic, but it was too late. A small amount of acid splashed on Katsuki's singlet, immediately causing it to smoke. "No, no, no," the girl panicked, immediately rushing over. "Oh God, I'm so sorry. It's all my fault." She immediately began to create more acid, but this time it was incredibly runny, appearing less like glue and more like milk. I'll lower both the viscosity and solubility to make it as safe as possible, and maybe I can wash it away, the girl rambled to herself. Oh, you's never gonna accept me now. Hey, it's all right, Katsuki interrupted her, grabbing her wrists and stopping her from applying more of the acid. My shirt's the only thing damaged. But, my acid, it hit you, the girl protested, weakly trying to free herself from Katsuki's grip. If I don't wash it off, then dash. Then nothing, Katsuki grunted. He let go of the girl's wrists before grabbing the hem of his singlet, pulling it up to show where the acid had burnt through. But while it had easily eaten through the cloth, Katsuki's skin was almost entirely unharmed, only a slight redness to the skin where the acid touched. See, I'm fine, he said to her. Doesn't even hurt. What you? How? The girl exclaimed. I mean, yeah, I reacted instinctively and didn't have time to increase the solubility all that much, but it should still be burning you. Please, it's no more than a cleaner to me, Katsuki shrugged. My old man's got an acid quirk as well, so I inherited his resistance to it. The girl's mouth hung open in shock, her eyes, black sclerae with yellow irises, equally wide. I'm Bakugo, he said, holding out his hand. Help me with taking down some of the 3-pointers, and I'll consider us even. Ashido, the girl replied. She reached out to take his hand, only to hesitate. Katsuki huffed to himself, his hand crossing the distance and taking hers, shaking it up and down despite her surprise. Then let's move, Katsuki grunted, turning away. We've wasted enough time with you worrying about me. He didn't bother looking behind him to see if she'd follow. If she did, she was worth it. If not, then she was simply another extra he didn't need to pay attention to. But the sound of feet pounding on pavement behind him let him know her choice, and as she walked beside him it confirmed it. They required no more words, both racing off to find their next target. A system was quickly established, where they would alternate who dealt the killing blow to the villain bot, ensuring neither hogged too many points. Sometimes Katsuki would distract them, allowing Ashido to melt their core processor, and sometimes Ashido would spread acid on their joints and hydraulics, locking them in place as Katsuki began demolishing them. But defeating robots wasn't all they used their quirks in tandem for. The first person that Katsuki had seen in trouble, something within compelled him to change directions and help him. Not out of some selfless desire to help, though. No, this was him acting out against the system that had let him down, that made him see just how many fakes there were within Japan. People who only played the role of a hero, rather than truly fulfilling the act. Fakes that Master detested, who had taught both Katsuki and Izuku the merits of a true hero. And so, whether it be a student who was being pursued by a trio of 1-pointers, some idiot who had somehow managed to get himself trapped on top of a street light, or even a girl who had gotten trapped underneath rubble once the 0-pointer emerged and began rampaging, a good amount of time that Katsuki and Ashido could have spent defeating robots was instead used helping their fellow examinees. It felt nice, you know? Ashido spoke up as the two made their way to the exit of the testing ground. Using my quirk to help people. Katsuki grunted, sharing her feelings. It's just, well, at my middle school, everyone thinks I'm a shoo-in to be a pro hero. I'm pretty, athletic, and really charismatic. I mean, I'm even able to get bullies to be friends with the kids they're bullying. And sure, I've got friends, but I always felt like I was held out at a distance. I mean, I get it, I could really hurt someone with my quirk, but it hurts me emotionally. I create acid. Naturally, my spit, my blood, my sweat, even my freaking tears are acidic. I mean, I've only kissed a guy once, but well, after what happened, no one's ever tried it afterwards. What happened? Katsuki asked. Poor guy's lips got a rash, Ashido confessed, her shoulders slumped. I didn't even give him tongue, it's just that I was wetting my lips since I was nervous. I didn't even like him all that much, it was just a dare at a party. So unless I give someone the driest, lightest peck, they're getting chemical burns of a light variety. Teasage weak-ass extras, Katsuki scoffed. Imagine getting hives from kissing you. You sound confident, Ashido teased, causing Katsuki's eye to twitch as he took offense at the unspoken challenge. It wouldn't matter how much spit-swapping we did, I wouldn't have a reaction. Like hell am I being beaten by some saliva? His comment caused Ishido to go silent for a moment, resulting in Katsuki walking in silence, fully aware of how much Ishido was staring at him. What? He grunted when the silence had reached truly annoying levels. Oh, just noticed the cut on your cheek, Ishido said, gesturing on her own face. Katsuki wiped a finger along it, and sure enough when he pulled it back there was a slight red smear. It's nothing, I'll just put some spit on it. While Katsuki hadn't put much thought into his offhand comment, he certainly hadn't expected Ishido to lean in close, her tongue sliding up his cheek. What was that for? Katsuki yelled, anger and hormonal confusion coloring his cheeks, one of them still wet with saliva as he leapt away in surprise. What? You said you'd put some spit on it, Ishido coyly teased. And besides, I wanted to see if your claim was true. And look at that, no reaction. In it, raccoon eyes, don't do something like that without warning me. Raccoon eyes. Ishido indignantly yelled, her hands balled at her hips. It's Ishido. Sure do. What's going on? Some extra asked his fellow extra as they passed by. I dunno, man, some lovers spat. The comment caused the squabble between the two to immediately die, prompting Katsuki to turn away in a huff, his hands jammed into the pockets of his pants. I'm outta here, he grumbled, stalking away, though not before calling out over his shoulder. See you around at UA, or whatever. Huh? Ishido asked, jogging over to walk beside him. Whatcha mean? You getting in, dumps, Katsuki growled, annoyed she wasn't able to understand such a basic thing. You're getting in for sure. You've got a strong quirk, you're not some dumbass extra who thinks they don't need to train their body, and you act like a real hero, not those fakes that everyone adores. You really think so? Ishido quietly asked. Yui, DB filled with morons if they can't see that, Katsuki muttered. So I mean it when I say, see ya later. Katsuki heard Ishido's footsteps come to a stop behind him, but he didn't slow down, nor did he look back. After all, he had his best friend to meet up with and compare scores. Then, they'd be able to see who was able to brag to Master about getting the most points. Today was the day. Despite all of her fears, all of her insecurities telling her she'd never make it, that it was all a pipe dream, here she was, not as a visitor, but a legitimate, bona fide student, and a member of the hero course to boot. The week after the entrance exam, Mina had been beyond nervous, dreading that Bakugo's words, reassuring as they were only said by him because he hoped for the best. But it seemed he was right in ways he probably didn't realize. As All Might had explained, and how crazy was it that All Might of all people was going to be a teacher here, there was a hidden point system in the tests, one that was awarded for heroic action. And she got 52 of them. Adding it to her villain point score of 49, it almost doubled her score to a whopping 101, placing her in third place. Of course, Bakugo got a higher score than she did in both villain and rescue points, having a total of 121, putting him in first place, just pulling ahead of the student in second place by less than a dozen points. I really hope we're in the same class, Mina giggled in her mind, practically skipping through the large, sunlit corridors of UA, and not just because he's cute. And that was another thing Mina had been wrestling with in the past few weeks since the entrance exam at the end of February. She was crushing on the boy who worked alongside her, and she was crushing hard. He carried himself with so much confidence, yet also seemed incredibly sympathetic towards her insecurities of people treating her like she was as much of a biological hazard as her quirk. She'd never found herself attracted to anyone, especially after the incident with that boy, so much so she'd started to wonder if she was an ace. But now, whenever she thought of the way Bakugo fought alongside her, or how he'd reassured her that he hadn't been hurt by her blunder, she felt a warm sensation in her chest. And if her mind ever wandered to how she'd liked the cut on his cheek, her face flushed. What was I thinking? Mina wailed in her mind, her hands tightening around the straps of her backpack. Stupid, stupid. You never think things through. What if he thinks I'm weird, or he's just not into me? Gah, I should have figured out if he was into girls first. But despite her inner turmoil, Mina didn't stop walking, nor did she hope Bakugo was in Class 1B, the second class of the hero course for the first-year students. Because even if it might be awkward at first, Mina would much rather the opportunity of repairing any damage to her image with him in her class. Well, he seemed nice and understanding despite how fearsome and intimidating he looked, so I'm sure it'll all work out, Mina reassured herself as she came to a stop in front of the towering door of Class 1. Here goes. Sliding open the door, a feat easier than it initially looked, Mina's eyes swept over the classroom, taking it all in. It was surprisingly normal, with 4 columns of 5 desks taking up the center of the class, with a whiteboard and podium placed at the front with lockers lining the back wall. Mina also wasn't the first student to arrive, far from it in fact, as over half the available seats were already taken. And while many of her classmates certainly stood out due to their appearances, like a student with a crow's head or a blonde Western girl, Mina's eyes stopped, searching the moment they landed on a head of spiky, blonde hair. "Hi, Bakugo," she grinned, waving to grab his attention and walking over. "We're in the same class." "Hey, raccoon eyes," Bakugo grunted, his feet resting on the desk in front of him. "It's a Shido." Mina protested, her cheeks puffing in frustration. "You know this." "Yeah, I do," he smirked. "That's why it's funny." "Oh, you're the acid girl," a voice remarked, causing Mina to properly register the 2 people sitting with Bakugo. But the moment her eyes wandered over, they immediately widened. Sitting next to Bakugo with a warm, welcoming smile was an absolute beefcake of a boy, his uniform straining underneath the sheer muscle mass. His hair was a mop of curly green hair, a color shared with his eyes, and freckles formed 2 diamond shapes on his cheeks. However, he wasn't alone at the desk next to Bakugo's, as another student sat next to him, a girl, her chair pressed right up against his. She had pale gray hair styled in a long pixie bob, part of it side-swept to the left, causing it to completely cover that side of her face. She appeared tired due to her one visible eye being half-lidded, with the iris being a deep blue, and Mina couldn't help but feel a sting of jealousy over the girl's full lips. "Yep, that's me," Mina replied, grinning broadly. "So you're friends with Bakugo?" "Yep, Kaken and I are childhood friends," her green-haired classmate nodded. "My name's Midoriya, and this is Yanagi." The gray-haired girl didn't reply to his introduction, only nodding her head towards Mina, her arms held in front of her, reminding Mina of a zombie. "Well, my name's Ashido Mina," Mina said, introducing herself. "Do you guys mind if I sit with you?" "Pull up a seat," Bakugo said, gesturing to a seat next to him. "Izuku says that ghost face is pretty strong, and I've seen you in action, raccoon eyes, so I'm fine with the 2 of you hanging with us." "Ghost face?" Yanagi asked aloud, her plump lips pressed together in thought. "He was a spooky slasher. I like it." "From Scream?" Mina asked, trying to remember details about that 20th century horror film. "Wasn't he just a guy in a mask?" Yanagi nodded. "But he was able to be so spooky even though he was a normal human." "I suppose," Mina shrugged. "I watched it once with some friends for Halloween, but it wasn't my kind of horror film." "You like horror films?" Midoriya asked, a smile growing on his face. "Oh God, not another one," Bakugo grumbled. "First there was Izuku, then there were 2, and now there's 3. Mina's experience with being a popular girl as well as knowing how to best talk to people informed her of the blonde's irritation, and sensing a chance for payback, Mina grinned. "What's the matter, Bakugo?" Mina teased, leaning into him. "Are you afraid of horror movies?" "Like hell I am," he roared, his feet falling off of the table and planting themselves on the ground. "I ain't afraid of anything. Especially since Izuku and my folks always vote on watching scary movies." "What kind?" Yanagi asked, her hanging hands pressed together as she looked up at Midoriya. "What's your favorite horror film?" "Oh well, there's a lot to choose from," Midoriya shrugged. "I don't really think I have a favorite." "Pisuchiya, right?" Bakugo scoffed. "It's The Thing, no question. You've watched that one at least a dozen times." "Oh, body horror," Yanagi nodded sagely. "A good choice and an underutilized theme." "Well, it's not just because of the monster," Midoriya defended. "It's really intriguing, wondering who's actually human or is merely posing as one." Even though the surprise is ruined after watching it the first time, it's still fun to go back and see all of the small clues I missed before. What about you, Yanagi? Mina asked, leaning forward to look past the guys. What kind of horror is your favorite? Supernatural, Yanagi instantly answered. The Conjuring, The Exorcist, and my favorite, The Exorcism of Emily Rose. Anything with ghosts, demons, and possession. Yeah, I can see that, Mina agreed, silently wondering if the girl's posture was a result of her love of supernatural horror or her love of supernatural horror a result of her posture. It was never my kind of horror though. I'm all about space horror and thrillers. Let me guess, Alien franchise is your favorite? Bakugo asked with a raised eyebrow. Mina stammered, blushing as a knowing smirk crossed Bakugo's face. Shut up, okay. It's not because the xenomorphs also have acidic blood, alright. Sure, Bakugo nodded, not even bothering to pretend to believe her. It really isn't, Mina said, looking down at her lap. I mean, yeah, they look cool, and sure, I think it's cool that something from over a century ago had creatures that have acidic blood like me, but my favorite character is Ellen Ripley. She's the main character, right? Midoriya asked. Of the first few movies at least. Mina nodded eagerly. She's a total badass, and she's a strong female character to boot, which is extra special when you consider when the movie came out. And sure, the visual effects nothing compared to what can be done these days, but that doesn't detract from the story. Growing up, I always wanted to be just like her, someone who keeps struggling, even when everything seems hopeless. She's my inspiration to be a hero. Bakugo, Midoriya, and Yanagi were all quiet, the only noise being the chatter of their classmates around them. Mina blushed at the impressed looks her classmates were giving her, especially from Bakugo's wide eyes. Well done, he muttered, his feet resting back on the surface of the table. That was actually kinda deep, raccoon eyes. Why thank you, Mina bowed before a smirk grew on her lips and a twinkle in her eyes formed. Pomeranian. Why you dash, Bakugo growled, only for a loud voice to cut him off. Attention, everyone, the voice said, coming from a male student with dark blue hair and glasses on his face. Our teacher will be arriving shortly. As students on our first day, we must all be seated at our desks, ready for class to begin. The loud, and in Mina's honest opinion, annoying, student's gaze swept over the class, quickly coming to a stop when it crossed Mina and the three other students who she wasn't quite sure whether or not were considered her friends yet. Remove your foot from that desk, the student demanded as he strode over, a frown on his face as his right hand was held flat in the air, thumb facing upwards while the pinky faced the front. Such an action is insulting to those who came to UA before us as well as the craftsman who made the desk. Dude, it's not even the first day, Mina spoke up, beating Bakugo to the punch. I mean, it's barely a half day. We've got the entrance ceremony and some orientation, but we'll all be heading home at lunch. That does not matter, the spectacled student argued, his left hand rising to push up his glasses. It is still our first encounter with not only who is to be our homeroom teacher, but also with the staff of this institution as a whole. We must make as good of a first impression as possible. And another thing, you are sitting too close together. Students should occupy a single table, and each table is meant to have a single student. Are you telling us we can't sit together? Midoriya frowned, genuine confusion and bafflement clear in his voice. Totally creepy. Yanagi agreed with a deadpan expression and tone. It kinda is. Mina did a double take, her mind stuttering as she heard Yanagi's voice coming from the doorway, despite the fact she was sitting only 3 chairs across from her. Turning her head, Mina saw another student standing in the doorway, one who was strangely familiar, a girl with brown hair cut into a short bob and what looked like blush marks on her cheeks. In the time that it took Mina's mind to comprehend the similarity in the voices of her classmates, she realized the girl was one of the students she and Bakugo had helped in the entrance exam. Oh, you guys were the ones who helped me out in the test, the girl exclaimed, her eyes widening as they focused on Mina and Bakugo, bouncing over and brushing past their blue-haired classmate as if he didn't exist. You guys really saved me back there, like wow, that 0-pointer was huge. Don't worry about it, Mina grinned, nodding her head to the side towards Bakugo. Pomeranian over here was the one who had the idea of going around and helping people. Because inside that gruff, spiky exterior, he's got a heart of gold. It's Bakugo, Bakugo grunted. Don't listen to Raccoon Eyes, feelings had nothing to do with it. Any hero worth a DMN helps people in need, even if it gets in the way of their objective. But the test was about defeating the villain bots, the glasses-wearing student argued. What, you went in thinking it was a sterile environment? Bakugo scoffed, rolling his eyes. You thought that was an accurate depiction of being a hero? Rampage around the city, defeat bad guys and get a medal? Then you clearly don't have the mindset to be a real hero, Glasses. You're just like those fakes who infest Japan, someone who can't see the forest for the trees. Listen here, my name is Ida Tenya, and I don't dash. If you're here to socialize, then get out. The argument came to an immediate halt and all noise in the classroom quickly died as the attention of everyone was drawn to the front, focusing on the odd sight at the podium. Standing there was a man, his black hair long and shaggy, his face unshaven and covered in stubble, and his eyes bloodshot and surrounded by bags. But despite looking like someone who'd ask strangers for spare change, the oddest part of his was that only his face was visible, as he was entirely encased within a yellow sleeping bag. This is the hero course, the strange man matter-of-factly stated before placing a juice pack in his mouth, draining it in a single pull. The class remained silent in disbelief and shock as the yellow sleeping bag fell away, revealing the man's clothing. A large gray scarf was wrapped around his neck, and he wore simple, nondescript black clothing, being a long-sleeved shirt and pants. The only items of clothing that made him look anything other than a homeless bum were the utility belt around his waist as well as the combat boots on his feet. It took 8 seconds for you to quiet down, the man stated once he was fully free of the sleeping bag. Time is a precious resource. You lot aren't very rational, are you? Are you a teacher? Mina asked, tentatively raising her hand. I'm your homeroom teacher, Aizawa Shota, he deadpanned, his flat eyes seeming to stare right into Mina's soul. Pleased to meet you. He doesn't sound very pleased, Mina thought to herself, though she was smart enough to keep such thoughts private. Their supposed teacher reached into his sleeping bag, pulling out the shirt of UA's P uniform, holding it up with one hand for all the class to see. Quickly now. You all should have brought your P uniforms, correct? Change into your gym clothes and head out to the grounds. There are signs showing the way. And with that, their teacher turned and walked away, leaving Mina and probably the rest of her classmates increasingly confused and off-kilter. So, I guess we get changed? Mina suggested, a comment that was heard by the annoying boy with glasses. You heard the teacher, everyone, he declared. Get out your gym clothes and head to the changing rooms. I'm sure everything will be explained when we arrive. Masue Kitai knew that he was meant to expect the unexpected at a hero school, especially one as notoriously unorthodox as UA, but this was something he'd never expected. A test of our quirks? He asked, many of his classmates asking similar questions at the strange announcement from their equally strange homeroom teacher. What about the entrance ceremony? A girl with brown hair cut into a bob asked. Or guidance sessions? No time to waste on that stuff if you want to become heroes, their teacher dismissed, much to everyone's shock. UA is known for its freestyle educational system. That applies to us teachers as well. Kitai, like the rest of the class, was silent with confusion, trying to understand the hidden meaning. Softball throwing, the standing long jump, the 50-meter dash, endurance running, side-to-side stepping, upper body training, seated toe touch, their teacher listed, each test causing a finger to be raised as it was mentioned. You did all these in middle school, yes? Your standard, no quirks allowed, gym tests, as some people call it. Kitai nodded in acknowledgement, though he noticed the disdain their teachers spoke of those tests. They're all ridiculous and are not only a waste of time, but their very concept is downright insulting, the teacher scowled, surprising Kitai. The government still insists on prohibiting the use of our powers, clinging to old laws that are no longer practical. It's far from rational, it's downright ludicrous. Fortunately, UA is considered private property, meaning we can function like society should, where everyone can perform to their limit. The teacher pulled out a softball from his pocket, tossing it into the air before catching it. Bakugo, you were the top scorer in the entrance exam. How far could you throw a softball in middle school? 67 meters, a male student with blonde, spiky hair answered. Great. Now try it with your power, their teacher said, tossing the ball over in an underarm throw, easily being caught by the student. Do whatever you need to. Just don't leave the circle. Give it all you've got. Awesome, the blonde grinned, stretching his arms before pulling his right arm back. With a twist of his torso and snapping his arm up and around in an arc, he performed a perfect throw, if a perfect throw involved being a walking explosion. With a deafening blast and a blinding light, the blonde's hand seemed to explode, sending the softball careening into the air. It took a moment, but eventually a spot formed in the sky, getting closer and closer to the ground before it landed with a bounce, the softball quickly coming to a rest. It's important for us to know our limits, the teacher explained, pulling out a phone. That's the first rational step to figuring out what kind of heroes you'll be. And the distance Katai's classmate had thrown the ball, 705.2 meters. Whoa! This is awesome, one of Katai's classmates exclaimed, a girl with long blonde hair, oval glasses, and strangely enough, a set of headphones resting around her neck. 705 meters? Seriously? A muscular classmate with brown hair and thick lips gaped, his eyes comically wide. So we can use our quirks for real. A girl with bubblegum pink skin cheered. Man, the hero course is great. While some of his classmates were obviously eager, it certainly wasn't the majority, and Katai was part of it. His quirk, gas, wasn't suited for physical activity at all, instead rewarding a more lethargic playstyle, waiting for the opponent to run out of oxygen, breath in the purple gas he created, and pass out. But looking around, Katai wasn't the only one with a more reserved opinion. Bakugo, the student whose throw had caused this outburst, was surprisingly subdued, and though he certainly seemed proud of his result, he didn't harp on about it like some of Katai's former classmates in middle school would have. Many of his classmates didn't seem to be all that expressive, either because they wore a mask over their face, had a crow's head, or because they simply seemed either uninterested or resolved. But out of everyone on the field, the one whose expression was the furthest from excited was their teacher's. Awesome, you say? He asked aloud, his voice, even though it wasn't all that loud, immediately cutting through the noise. You're hoping to become heroes after 3 years here, and you think it'll be all fun and games? His head rose slightly, allowing everyone to see his eyes peeking out from behind his long hair. His expression was flat, but his eyes told the whole story, he was said. Right? He declared with a flat, merciless voice. The one with the lowest score across all 8 events will be judged hopeless, and will be expelled. What? Katai exclaimed, his voice one of many asking the exact same question with horror. Your fates are in our hands, their teacher said, an unnerving grin spreading across his face as he pulled his hair up and out of his face. Welcome. This is the hero course at UA High. Hitoshi had been training under Eraserhead, or Sir as he was always careful to call him out loud, for over half a year now, and the results were plain to see. He was stronger, faster, and had much more stamina than he had in the past. Even with all that training, however, he'd barely made it into the hero course, saved only by the rescue points he'd managed to earn. But even though his acceptance had been a close thing, hinged entirely on a mechanic he hadn't been told about, Hitoshi didn't hold that against Eraserhead. His mentor hadn't told him what specific kinds of robots he'd be fighting, sure, but he had told him they'd be robots. He hadn't told him about the rescue points, true, but he'd instilled in him a mentality to always help people in need, even if he might not be rewarded for it, or maybe when it might be disadvantageous to him. Because Hitoshi knew Eraserhead was firm yet fair, not accepting slackers or those who gave a half-butted attempt. He expected effort from those he taught, especially since he himself gave it his all. And it was because of this that Hitoshi wasn't surprised by his mentor's threat, unlike the rest of his classmates. The lowest score will be expelled? One of his classmates, a brown-haired girl, exclaimed. It's only the first day. I mean, even if it weren't, that's totally unfair. Natural disasters, highway pileups, rampaging villains, calamity is always right around the corner, Eraserhead explained. I'd say Japan is full of unfair things. It's the duty of the citizens of a country to correct the unfairness, and we heroes are the ones who are meant to lead the charge in that unending war. If you were hoping to spend your evenings hanging out, I'm sorry to tell you that for the next 3 years, they will run you through the ringer. Despite what some people might claim, being a hero isn't fun and games. If you don't give it your all, people might get hurt, so anyone who doesn't take this seriously doesn't deserve the authority the position will give you. So give it your all, that's what it means to go plus ultra. So bring it. Use your strength to overcome this adversity before you. Hitoshi felt pride welling in his chest. This is what a hero truly was, in his mind, and not only had he been fortunate enough to be mentored by Eraserhead whenever the pro had the spare time, but now he was going to be Hitoshi's official teacher. The demonstration is over, their teacher declared, his gaze sweeping across the class. Now it's for real. And thus, the 8 rigorous tests began. First was the 50-meter dash. As Eraserhead explained to them, there would be 10 races, 2 students per race, going in their class order. First was Aoyama and Ishido. Aoyama was a male student with blonde, stylized hair, a strange silver belt around his waist, and for some reason, when Aoyama walked past Hitoshi he smelt of roses. The second student to race, Ishido, had bubblegum pink skin, fluffy pink hair with 2 small horns poking out of the top, and respectably athletic build. But as Ishido lowered herself onto the starting block, Hitoshi noticed that Aoyama hadn't done such a thing, instead standing straight with his back facing towards the finish line. Hee, Aoyama chuckled, allowing Hitoshi to hear what he thought sounded like a French accent. So unimaginative all of you. Ready? Eraserhead asked, getting a nod from both racers. If we can use our quirks dash. Go! Then there's no better way than this. Hitoshi watched with eyes wide with surprise as Aoyama leapt into the air, a beam of sparkling blue light firing out of the belt and sending him sailing past Ishido as she seemed to skate down the track. The beam didn't carry him all the way, only about halfway down the track, his rough landing giving Ishido the chance to catch up. However, Aoyama was quick to get back to his feet before using his quirk once more, crossing the line just after Ishido, the two of them earning a time of just over 5 seconds. The next 2 called up were Azui and Ida. Azui was a girl who, if Hitoshi were to be completely honest, had the facial features of a frog. That wasn't to say she was ugly, far from it, but with her wide mouth, blank expression, large eyes and small frame, Hitoshi couldn't help but think of the comparison. Ida on the other hand was much taller, the boy equal to Hitoshi in height. He had dark blue hair that was parted on the right side of his head, as well as a pair of rectangular glasses that sat on his nose. What caught Hitoshi's attention, however, were the legs of his pants that had been rolled up, exposing what looked like exhaust vents embedded within his calves. Ready? Go! Both students moved in a fitting manner, with Ida's legs being propelled by the vents on his legs while Azui leapt down the track. She must have some kind of frog quirk, Hitoshi thought as Ida was the first to cross the finish line in just over 3 seconds, while Azui in 5.5. The next 2 students called up were Uraraka and Kaminari. The former was the girl who had protested against Eraserhead's declaration, and while Hitoshi might admit that his mentor's decision was harsh, it was far from being unfair. Any student who didn't give it their all didn't deserve to be at UA, and thanks to not only his mentor's words but also Hitoshi's own research, it really was the premier of hero academies. But despite his misgivings over the brown-haired girl's naivety, Hitoshi was still curious about her quirk when he saw her patting her clothing. Kaminari, on the other hand, was a male student of shortish height with electric yellow hair, and what appeared to be a black lightning-shaped streak in his hair. Ready? Go! This time, the race was fairly normal, with Uraraka pulling slightly ahead of Kaminari and winning by a hair's breadth, neither of them making any overt display of their quirks. She must have done something to her clothing, Hitoshi hypothesized. Maybe to assist her movement? The next 2 were Koda and Kodai, and the 2 of them were both eye-catching, though for different reasons. The former, Koda, was a male student who was not only broad and muscular but also quite tall despite standing eye-to-eye with Hitoshi. This was thanks to the rocky outcrop that extended out of the top of his head that took the place of his hair. The latter, Kodai, was a female student who stood out amongst the rest thanks to her sheer beauty. She had pale skin, black hair that sat in a bob, her fringe swept to the right, and a cool, neutral expression on her face. Ready? Go! The two students burst off the starting block, and for the first time in the races, Hitoshi wasn't able to tell if a quirk was being used in it. Kodai was the first to finish, the girl's light frame making it easier for her to gain speed compared to Koda's larger, stocky build. Next was Sato and Shield, both of them muscular students. Sato was tall, and not because of some head mutation like with Koda. His build was similar, being much larger and stockier than Hitoshi's slim, athletic build that specialized in evasion and movement. He had spiky brown hair that was swept back, as well as a pair of large lips. Shield was also muscular, though not to the same level as Sato, and immediately her last name clued Hitoshi in that she was the class international transfer student. But while Sato had some noteworthy mutations, Shield was interesting due to the clothing she wore. She wore a pair of headphones around her neck, and coming out from the short sleeves of the gym shirt she wore were what looked like red wrappings that covered her forearms and wrapped around her knuckles. Teacher? Shield asked, raising her hand and catching Eraserhead's attention. I need my headphones for my quirk, so it isn't an issue that I brought them, right? Eraserhead just blinked at her for a moment before sighing. Sure, whatever makes you do your best, I suppose. Thank you, sir. She smiled, slipping them on over her ears and pressing a button on the side. She lowered herself into a crouch, her feet pressing against the starting block, and as she did Hitoshi's eyes widened as she began to glow, and his eyes widened even further when that glow turned into aqua-colored lightning. Ready? Go! It wasn't even close. When Sato took his first step, he likely caused the ground beneath him to grind against each other. When Shield took her first step, the ground shattered. By Sato's second step, Shield was already halfway. And within half a second, while Sato was still within the first quarter of the track, Melissa had crossed the line. Shield Melissa, 0.52 seconds, declared the machine that recorded the times. But while Hitoshi's classmates were very vocally shocked by their classmates' record-shattering result, Hitoshi's attention was on the student herself. More specifically, how the moment she had crossed the finish line, the sparks of energy that had surrounded her dropped, and her headphones were hastily pulled off her ears, her hands replacing them as they rubbed the sides of her head. How odd, Hitoshi thought to himself. I suppose it makes sense though. Strong quirks usually have some kind of side effect. The real issue is how to overcome them. After that highly impressive display, Hitoshi felt a mix of insecurity as well as comfort when he was called up next, alongside a student named Shoji. After all, while the result Shield had performed was assumedly impossible to beat, Hitoshi was secure in the knowledge that everyone else was in the same boat as him. And anyway, Hitoshi certainly wasn't the first student to rely solely on his own athletic ability. Glancing at his opponent, Hitoshi took note of his towering height, quite possibly the tallest in the class, his gray hair and hung over his face, not that it covered much thanks to the mask that he wore. But most prominent were his obvious mutation, the 2 extra pairs of arms, all 3 limbs connected with a fleshy membrane on each side. The lower limbs didn't end in hands, however, but merely in stumps. Strange, Hitoshi thought to himself as Eraserhead began the countdown. Go! Hitoshi kicked off the starting block, focusing solely on the finish line ahead of him rather than the sounds of Shoji's loud footfalls beside him. He pumped his arms harder, sparing nothing as he sprinted as fast as possible, and in return he was rewarded with the sound of his classmates' movements starting to come from behind him rather than beside. Shinso Hitoshi, 7.14 seconds. The machine chimed as Hitoshi sprinted across the finish line. Shoji Mizo, 7.82 seconds. That was a close one, Hitoshi remarked to his classmate, pausing at the end of the track to catch his breath. Well done. Thank you, Shoji nodded. Though I'll do better in the grip strength and softball throw for certain. I can imagine it, Hitoshi chuckled, watching as the next 2 racers, Jiro and Tokoyami, one a girl who appeared to have earphone jacks for earlobes and the other a boy with a crow's head, took their places. I guess the membranes between your arms don't make you all that aerodynamic. An unfortunate truth. The race after Hitoshi's was uneventful as well, neither student seeming to have a quirk that helped them in the race, with the crow-headed student named Tokoyami coming first slightly ahead of Jiro. The next race was one that Hitoshi was interested in, specifically for one of the racers. He watched as Todoroki and Bakugo were called up, his focus entirely on the student who'd been chosen for the softball throw earlier. He, out of everyone else in the class, was the one Hitoshi needed to keep an eye on. After all, he was the top scorer in the entrance exam. It also means he likely has a heroic heart, Hitoshi bitterly thought to himself, watching as two students who had been sitting with the blonde before school started, the pink-skinned girl from earlier as well as a green-haired muscular boy, cheered him on. A heroic heart and a flashy, heroic quirk. Some people have all the luck. Ready? Go! Unlike the previous races, quirks were openly displayed this time, and by both competitors. Todoroki gained the lead by creating a trail of ice under his right foot, using his left to push himself down the track. Bakugo countered this by using the explosions he'd shown earlier, aimed behind him and giving him just the boost to slip past Todoroki, allowing to take first place. Bakugo Katsuki, 4.13 seconds. Todoroki Shoto, 4.29 seconds. Impressive, Hitoshi mused, watching the green-haired boy, Midoriya, high-five Bakugo as he and a student named Masue were the next to be called up. So he has some brains to him, rather than relying on pure brute strength. I suppose he'd have to be since he was the top scorer. The two next racers seemed to be polar opposites. Midoriya, while not tall by any means, being shorter than Hitoshi, was absolutely jacked with muscles, his middling height seeming to amplify it all the more. His opponent, Masue, was a skinny male student with short, wavy, light brown hair and tan skin. Ready? Go! The moment the two boys began racing, it was clear that Midoriya's muscles weren't for show as he began widening the gap between himself and Masue almost immediately, though Masue was clearly giving it his all. Despite this, Midoriya was quick to cross the finish line, moving much faster than one would assume for someone so muscular. Just what is he eating to get so large? He wondered as the final two students were called up, Yanagi and Yaoyorozu. Yanagi was an incredibly pale girl with light gray hair, worn in a pixie bob long enough to be sideswept to the left and covering the entirety of that side of her face. Yaoyorozu on the other hand was tall, being almost as tall as Hitoshi, with flawless skin and long black hair that she had tied up behind her. But while Yanagi took her place at the starting block, Hitoshi was shocked to see Yaoyorozu lift up the hem of her shirt, and the shock was quickly joined by surprise as he watched her pull out a pogo stick from her midriff. Ready? Go! Both girls began racing down the track in their own literally quirky way. Because while Yaoyorozu bounded down the track on her pogo stick, showing great skill with it, Yanagi didn't even touch the ground, instead shakily floating down the track like a specter chasing after the living, though it quickly turned into looking like a specter fleeing from the living instead as Yanagi passed Yaoyorozu, the gray-haired girl coming first. And that's the last race, Eraserhead nodded, jotting something down on his phone before walking towards the nearby gymnasium. We'll do your grip strength test next. Katsuki followed the teacher into the gymnasium, taking in the tiered seating that ringed the building on the upper level before focusing back on their teacher as he stood next to a small plastic box. Inside here you'll find your standard grip strength testing machines, he explained blandly. There aren't enough for everyone to get one, so pair up into small groups and share one around. I don't care how you make a group, just that you do. If you graduate from UA with the qualifications to be a pro, you'll often have to create impromptu hero teams with your colleagues. Working together with strangers and those you don't know will be an inevitable part of life, so best get used to it now. Bakugo, Yanagi, Midoriya, let's team up. Ashido cheered, leaping up to wrap her arms around their necks, though her hold on Yanagi seemed tentative at best thanks to her being at the end of their small group. The pink-haired girl's words seemed to jolt the rest of the class into action, most students pairing up with those who were nearby, allowing Katsuki and his group to begin testing. So, who wants to go first? Ashido asked, holding the grip meter out. Rock, paper, scissors for it? Izuku suggested, And since no one else objected to it nor had a better idea, the four gathered in a small circle, their fists shaking in the air 3 times before revealing their hand. It couldn't have gone worse for Ishido. "You've gotta be kidding me," she screamed, gripping the wrist of the hand she'd thrown as if it had personally offended her, rather than it being her own fault. "What are the chances?" Indeed, while Katsuki, Izuku, and Yanagi had all thrown rock, Ishido was the only one to throw scissors, leaving no doubt that she was the one to go first. "Come on, raccoon eyes," Katsuki teased her with a grin. "You lost, so you get the penalty game." "Ah, come on, Bakugo please," she implored with wide puppy dog eyes. "You won't let a fair maiden like me be humiliated by forcing her to go first, will you?" "Go to hell," he muttered, and when he turned his head away, it certainly wasn't to save his resolve. And when his cheeks reddened, it was from irritation at her blatant attempt, and not because she pressed her arms together against her chest. "Man," Ishido whined, though that didn't stop her from picking up the grip strength meter. "Well, here goes." Katsuki watched her take in a deep breath before tensing her hand, squeezing the meter whilst also squeezing eyes closed, her face scrunched up in determination. After a moment of intense effort, the meter beeped as it produced her result. "All right, 51. Ishido cheered, holding it up for Katsuki and the others to see. "I did better than last year." "Nice," Izuku grinned before glancing at Katsuki and Yanagi. "If you guys don't mind, I'll go last, and you two could go in class order?" "Works for me," Katsuki shrugged, accompanied by Yanagi silently nodding. "Why Daya wanna go last, Midoriya?" Ishido asked as she handed the meter over to Katsuki. "Because he'd break it is why," Katsuki answered, though he decided not to elaborate on it, instead making his attempt and earning a very respectable score of 58 kgf. He was followed by Yanagi, who received a relatively meager score of 32 kgf. "Hey, don't sweat it, girl," Ishido comforted her with an arm around her shoulders. "Not everyone's a musclehead, you know? I mean, I'm strong because I do break dancing, and that requires some real strong arms and legs." "And your quirk is really versatile," Izuku added. "The way you floated in the 50-meter sprint was really cool. You used your quirk on your shoes, right?" "And some other items of clothing," Yanagi nodded. "Then you found a way to levitate yourself really easily," Izuku pointed out. "I don't know what you've asked for your hero costume, but you could add a sturdy layer of clothing underneath that you could levitate." "Maybe," Yanagi shrugged, though she didn't seem convinced. "It would look really spooky." Her eyes immediately looked up at Izuku, and Katsuki easily noticed the excitement in them, even if her face and voice remained blank. "Spooky how?" she pressed. "Like a specter or a ghost floating through the air," Izuku grinned. "You've already got the pose down, so it should be easy for you." Yanagi nodded at that, a small smile growing on her face. "I'll think about it." She then handed over the meter to Izuku, the group watching as the red, fleshy tentacle that was part of his quirk grew from his elbow, covering his forearm entirely. It wrapped around the handle, tightening all the while, continuing to do so in spite of the groaning and creaking from the machine. Finally, the device having reached its limit, the device broke, creating a loud snap. "Holy shit!" Ishido swore, leaping back in shock. "Yeah, not surprising," Katsuki nodded, fully expecting such a result. Izuku's always had a ridiculous mix of brains and brawn. And his tentacle is no joke. I remember it being a very strong grip," Yanagi spoke up, looking intently at Izuku. "Oh, thanks," he grinned, the tentacle disappearing back under his skin. "Would you consider it an iron grip?" "Yeah, I guess so." "So it would be impossible for someone to get out of it?" "Probably." "And they'd be completely at your mercy?" "I mean, if I got the right hold on them, I guess." Yanagi silently nodded, seemingly unbothered by the small trickle of blood that trailed out of her nose. "Yanagi, your nose is bleeding again," Izuku fussed, reaching into a pocket and pulling out a pack of tissues. "Here, use this. You should really get that checked out, you know." Yanagi mumbled under her breath, something about capture and a heroine, but Ishido's words made Katsuki put the many questions to the side. "But seriously, Midoriya, that's a really strong quirk," Ishido praised. Katsuki saw Izuku's already cheery expression brighten even further, and Katsuki's opinion of her rose higher. His guess was right, she wasn't some extra who was scared off by someone stronger than her. She was made of tougher stuff, and he respected her all the more for it. His quirk is really spooky, Yanagi added, having wiped away her bloody nose. Spooky? Ishido asked with a confused expression. That's just Yanagi's way of saying she likes it, Izuku explained, with Yanagi nodding in agreement. My quirk's called Chimera, and it's a multifaceted quirk. I used to think it only allowed me to create tentacles and gave me a loud roar, but last year I discovered I could shoot out webbing and turn invisible. Kaken and Master have been helping me with discovering my limits. Who's Master? Ishido asked. He's a guy who helped train us for UA, Katsuki carefully answered, doing his best to avoid revealing the fact that their master was training them through the illegal, unlicensed use of their quirks. We've also been helping him clean up the trash that's built up at our local beach. With each of them having completed their test, they milled about and watched their classmates making their attempts. It was because of this that they were all witness to 2 more of the meters being broken. One of them was by Shield, the blonde international student with glasses who wore her headphones around her neck unless she used her quirk, a quirk that caused her to accidentally crush the handle underneath her grip. The second was destroyed by Yaoyorozu, the girl with the large, spiky black ponytail, though Katsuki only caught the aftermath of it when a yelp was heard. He turned his head to see her sheepishly holding the device, a clamp being attached to the handle, being the reason for the damage. Very good, Mr. Aizawa stated, tapping on his phone before looking up to the class. Only 3 devices were destroyed, but I'd say that's a good thing. It means that the students who did break their devices know more about their powers than they did a few minutes ago. Katsuki was impressed. He'd initially assumed their teacher was a hard-ass with his threat to expel the lowest performing student. But it seemed it really was because he put such a high value on the students discovering their limits. Back outside, everyone, Mr. Aizawa ordered, already heading towards the door. We'll do our next few tests outside. Head over to the sand pit for your standing long jump. And thus the tests continued. For the standing long jump, Katsuki and his classmates were called up once again in pairs, each standing on the line before making their attempt. It started off strong with Aoyama once again using his laser quirk to launch himself across the pit, landing outside of it, while Ishido landed well within the sand. With the next pair, Azui was able to leap across the sand and just barely reach the other side, while Ida attempted to increase the distance of his leap by using his quirk midair, only for his legs to go flying out from underneath him, causing him to land in the sand in a heap. The next 2 pairs, Uraraka and Kaminari as well as Koda and Kodai all landed in the sand, none of them apparently having a quirk that could give them an above-average score. But when Sato and Shield were called up, Shield managed to leap over the sand, the aqua-tinted electricity that covered her body when she used her quirk dissipating the moment she landed. After this were another 2 pairs of unremarkable results, being Shinso and Shoji followed by Jiro and Tokoyami. Finally it was Katsuki's turn, and he took great pleasure in the fact that while Todoroki's attempt was no different than the rest who hadn't used their quirks, Katsuki was able to, barely, fly over the pit in a burst of explosions. Mark another point for me, Katsuki thought to himself, smirking at the half-half B. Something about Todoroki's cool, emotionless expression really set him off, like he thought himself better than everyone else. But Katsuki was going to make sure to tear down that false image. After Katsuki was Izuku and Masue, and while he knew that Izuku's quirk wasn't suited for the open environment, he was still glad to see his best friend leap slightly further than the rest of the no-quirk U students. Finally was Yanagi and Yaoyorozu, with the 2 girls clearing the sand in 2 different ways. Yanagi once again levitated herself across the sand, while Yaoyorozu seemed to grow a pole from underneath her palm, pushing her up into the air before it tipped forwards, causing her to land on the other side with a roll. What the hell is her quirk? Katsuki muttered to Izuku and Ishido. First a pogo stick, then a clamp, and now a vaulting pole? Maybe she's able to store items within her body? Izuku suggested. Or maybe she creates them? Ishido added. From what? No idea, Ishido shrugged, But if I had her quirk and I could choose what was used, I'd want it to be fat cells. That way I could eat as many sweets as I want without getting fat. Okay, we'll move to side stepping now, Mr. Aizawa declared, preventing Katsuki from remarking to Ishido just how ridiculous her idea was. A quirk that consumed fat? You're right.